Wow. Wow. Now, that
Thank you.
was
Thank you.
amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What's going on, Raiders? Thank you all so much for being back. This is episode 11, I believe, and our first guest, Stefan Milo. Stefan, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing great. Yeah. Thank you
And-
for having me. What an honor. First guest.
yeah. And Johanna, how about you? How are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm feeling really festive, and I think this is like for me, this is this marker of the beginning of my Christmas holiday. So I couldn't think of anything that I'd like to do more than talk about ancient stuff. So yeah, really excited.
Yeah,
and it's really, Stefan, because people on my channel know that me and my father often have like debates about ancient history, and it's weird because that's how I found you, because he would always send me your videos to be like, see, listen to this man. So I knew you before we got in contact, and it's exciting.
Shout out to your dad. I actually saw the video of you and your dad too. I think that might have been the first video I saw of yours, maybe, perhaps.
Well, I'll let him know.
Yeah.
So, well, Stefan, if you want to sort of give an intro to the audience, just say, what because you make great videos on ancient history, but they, cover areas that Johanna and I don't usually cover, the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic people of the ancient world. So kind of like give a breakdown of your expertise and what drew you to kind of having a conversation about lost civilizations or Ice Age cultures with us.
Yeah. So my channel is called Stefan Milo. It's my name, easy to find, or at least an abbreviated form of my long name. And yeah, like you said, I make videos. I tend to make videos about stuff that happened a really, really long time ago. Mm-hmm. Sometimes millions of years ago. A lot of human evolution. You can see that, like a wall of skulls, replica skulls, I should say, before we're demonetized. And yeah, I would say I don't have any expertise. I did do a degree in archaeology, and then after I graduated, I found myself doing other things. And then, like yourselves, probably I found myself drawn back into, the ancient world, ancient history, and just thought this would be a fun way to continue learning and talking about it, and maybe turn it into a career, which fortunately it has become one. So I'm very lucky. And yeah, I have no expertise, but I try to interview a lot of people for my videos. And as for what drew me into talking about lost civilizations stuff, I didn't have a big intention to do that, but people started commenting, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And so I found myself making a few videos on them. And I think you said the first video you saw of mine was when I made a rebuttal to Graham Hancock's first season of Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah. I remember. I remember something about there was a video that was intriguing to me. It was something like I watched a thorough review or something like I debunked everything or addressed everything that had to do with Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse.
Checking Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah.
But in a really decent way, because there's a lot of debunking videos for or against Ancient Apocalypse can turn quite personal. And I did remember really liking your video because you were so fair and you didn't throw any shade. It was just like fact checking, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I mean, well, whatever we agree about that, we're probably all interested in ancient civilizations. We all realistically share the same passion.
Yeah.
And I don't want to feel like I talk down to the viewer in any way who, didn't necessarily go to school to study archaeology. They're just following what they're interested in. So I can't say that, I'm only human. Maybe sometimes I get annoyed at things. I can't say that I'm always so polite, but I try to be. I definitely try to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so recently, Stefan and I got in touch with each other, and I forget. You said that you wanted to just sort of have like an open discussion about lost civilizations, Ice Age cultures, Atlantis, whatever exactly Atlantis is. And I thought that was really nice because, I had thought that the Graham Hancock Flint Dibble debate would create a nicer environment, because at the end of the debate, Flint said something about, it'd be nice to bring the temperature down in the room. That's exactly the opposite of what's happened in the last, 7 or 8 months. And so I think that having a conversation like this, with an audience watching and being able to openly discuss these things in a friendly way, is really, really nice. And I'm honored to have you on the show. So what we did is, for everybody watching, is we went in and we each made, to have it more like a discussion, less than a debate going back and forth. It was, we each prepared a question for each other. So Johanna and I prepared 3 questions for Stefan. Stefan prepared 3 questions for Johanna and I. So I think
would be like the Spider-Man meme, all of us good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I should have put that in there. So I guess what we'll do is, because we have about 9 questions in total, and it's going to take, it sounds like it's not very much, but it can go on forever. So I think where we'll start is, we'll start with Stefan, we'll go to Johanna, and then myself, and then we'll go around.
Yes, first.
So, I was going to say, for the audience watching, if you could, and I know that this is a broad question to ask, but if you could sort of summarize the Stone Age before 4,000 BC or so, the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic eras, kind of like what we're talking about in the Ice Age, just so people have a primer before we start getting into questions.
All right, the order.
Oh,
did you?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Stefan's.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You want me to go first? Oh, sorry. I thought you were waiting for a summary. Sorry,
I'm sorry. I was asking you, just as a primer, if you could sort of.
Oh, so we're all on the same page. What we're talking about when we say.
Like early Stone Age. Yeah, the early Stone Age eras. So the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic eras. If you can kind of set us up with a primer before we get to the questions.
Yeah. So the Paleolithic is the old Stone Age. That goes way, way back into time. From the sort of first moment humans are making tools, maybe the first moment that we split off from the common ancestor of us and chimpanzees. So Paleolithic can be anything from 3 to 4 to 5 million year old artifacts, down to roughly 12,000 years ago. It's such a huge span of time. Like it's kind of ridiculous, really. And in that time, humans are evolving. There's Neanderthals, there's all sorts of human relatives roaming around. And then from, say, I don't know if we have a precise date for when all of our archaic cousins are gone, but you could say almost certainly by 30,000 years ago, it's just anatomically modern humans left on the earth. Although, of course, I'm sure lots of your viewers know, we did have children with Neanderthals and Denisovans, so they're not properly gone. They are within us still. But there's not clearly different groups around by 30,000 years ago. It's just modern humans. And then, well, according to the, the academic interpretation, your viewers may disagree to this. Then we have a gap of about 12,000 years ago when we're hunter-gathering. And some people just call this time period roughly the Upper Paleolithic. Sometimes it's also broken into the Mesolithic. But either way, the Mesolithic and Upper Paleolithic, they're both hunter-gatherer societies. And then I think, roughly 12, 11, 10,000 years ago, we start to see the very earliest signs of farming. And with that seems to come other developments like living in one place permanently, megalithic architecture like Göbekli Tepe, I'm sure we all know, and places like Çatalhöyük, stuff like that. And then farming spreads around the world. In other areas, they develop farming themselves too, like in Mesoamerica, farming corn, and in South America, farming potatoes, things like that. But yeah, from roughly 10, 11, 12,000 years ago, then we're in the Neolithic farming Stone Age societies. And I don't know, when does the Bronze Age start? Is that like 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, roughly the Bronze Age starts?
Yeah, the Bronze Age would begin, I believe, 1800 BC, somewhere around there. And maybe it's earlier. Maybe it's earlier than that. I've always tied in the Bronze Age with Minoan Crete, maybe the height of Minoan Crete, but it could be a little bit earlier than that. But I know
think it's got to be earlier than that.
Yeah,
pyramids.
So I could be wrong with that, but
I think, yeah. So yeah, that's roughly the breakdown of human history in 30 seconds, 1 minute, the entirety of human history.
Yeah. So okay, so with this, we've got the 9 questions prepared. Stefan will go first, and then he'll have a question for us, and then we'll just cycle around from here.
Yeah. Okay. So obviously, as I kind of said there in that introduction, and that sort of, I think we're talking about that 30,000 to 12,000 time year period where I would say there's hunter gatherers basically exclusively across the world, but some people like yourself, I believe, Johanna, would disagree and think we have missed a civilization in that sort of 30,000 to 12,000 year time period. I don't want to misrepresent you though. Is that roughly the time period you think that this?
Well, I would say anything pre like there's something that we haven't quite organized or worked out that's happened in pre-dynastic. So I'd say sort of like pre-4000 BC. There's like a weird gray area of time where we kind of like, there's like a missing chapter between Göbekli Tepe time and pyramid time, where I think there are some really interesting things humans were doing. And I don't think we've quite got the order of what that was going on. And then things before the Younger Dryas as well. I'm very open to there being things, cultures or humans who had specific skill sets that we maybe didn't know about pre the Younger Dryas. Are you how do you feel about the Younger Dryas? Have you looked into the theories on that and the papers on that? And
I mean, I don't have any strong opinion on what caused it. You know, some people argue it was asteroid impact. Some people argue it was a result of all the ice melting and interrupting ocean currents, things like that. I don't have any strong opinion on that. Right?
But you agree that there was like a sort of a catastrophic thing that happened around the Ice Age that really threw a lot of.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go so strong as to say catastrophic, because from my perspective at that time period, roughly everyone is hunter gathering, and I wonder how quickly they'd have noticed the Younger Dryas, which, in case anyone isn't aware, it was like a sudden return to Ice Age temperature. Like the Earth had gotten warmer, and then boom, for like 1,000 years, it suddenly went back to the Ice Age.
Yeah.
And
Well, the black mat that's kind of found, that's where they find all of like the nanodiamonds, and they find all the evidence of like this extreme, and it was like fast impact of what happened, and like the megafauna with all their legs broken, and it was like something happened kind of quick, and it burned like a whole layer that's now in a sort of ash layer that's around that time period. And so, I mean, yeah, whether you're hunter gathering or whether you're living in a little stone house, like you're impacted by that. And they bottleneck the chromosomes, right? The like male chromosomes completely shrunk. I think there was 17 women to every man around the Younger Dryas.
I'm not sure about the genetic one, but what did you say something then, Luke? Oh, sorry.
Oh, no. Now I've got it on here. I was moderating something. I've got it on here where your first question that I had sort of prepared an answer to when we shared these back and forth was, you were talking about evidence for lost civilizations. I thought about this. I think that it's interesting. I heard somebody say recently that they're starting to see this search for Atlantis as more so of like an era of lost time. And I don't know how I feel about exactly that, But I think that an interesting evidence for a lost civilization that even like South American archaeologists don't disagree with is there is a have you ever heard of Corral Supe civilization on the western coast of Peru? It's on this desert coast of Peru, and you had Corral Supe cultures. They were like twin cultures, and they keep getting destroyed by these cataclysmic events, El Niños and La Niñas, just these tropical storms. And eventually, after maybe 10 generations or so, they move off of the coastline up into the Andes. And this is a pre-pottery civilization. We don't even know. We don't necessarily know what all tools that they had or their religion. We have no religious iconography from these people at all. But as soon as they get up into the Andes, maybe a little bit before 1000 BC or so, roughly, once they get up into the Andes, they start building these huge megalithic temples that have an interior, which is an innovation in the Andes, as far as we can tell. And they're building them out of these big megalithic, like cylindrical granite columns, and they have finely polished granite stele. It's called the Ramundi stone. And then all of a sudden, they have pottery. And they have painting on the pottery, and they have religious iconography, and they have a pantheon. And the pantheon is largely based around this half human, half jaguar deity or whatever. Anyways, what this is pointing at is it is the direct evidence of a lost civilization, at least a civilization that we don't have evidence for, that was existing in the Amazon 3,000 plus years ago, that was influencing Andean people who were fleeing from the coast. And so I think that's an interesting example of how, of a bona fide example of how people, how we can tell that there is a civilization that we don't have evidence for. I think another thing, which this is pretty interesting, is Johanna and I were talking about Easter Island recently. And if you listen to the oral histories of Easter Island, it's not that the people of Rapa Nui were, that they shipwrecked on the island, but they chose to go there. And I think it's pretty interesting. It's sort of, if you follow a lot of these oral histories that cross the Pacific, it kind of echoes back to this time that is undetectable, in the modern day, of people who were seafaring and knew more about the ocean than we can prove today. And so I think that, and that's not something that's disputed by archaeologists that work at Rapa Nui or Polynesian archaeologists. But I think that those are probably two simple examples of of evidences that even academics don't really dispute, that these cultures that we can detect are echoing back to or hearkening back to this lost period. Now, that's obviously not in the Ice Age, but I just think those are two great examples of how you can look and try to find evidence for cultures that are undetectable.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm certainly not going to come on the live stream and argue we know everything about ancient history.
Sure,
that would be absolute insanity. I suppose my bigger objection to a lost civilization isn't that there aren't civilizations that are yet to be found.
Mm-hmm.
It's that I don't believe that there is sort of one great civilization that had this sort of global reach across time in the Ice Age. That's the thing I object to the most.
I think we should probably clarify what our markers of civilization are for each of us, because when someone says the words like lost technology, lost civilization, I've very much changed my imagination of what I thought if there was a lost Ice Age civilization or Atlantis. I used to look at it very much through the sort of Greekified version, and I was looking for a Bronze Age, sort of on par with a Bronze Age society. But now I don't think of it quite so much like that. I can see where Plato has repackaged the story of Atlantis for a Greek audience, and using Greek stuff that people would recognize, and the descriptions of things to be more Greekified. So now I'm leaning more to a lost Neolithic society that had a skill set that we maybe didn't attribute to them before that. Like the one real bit that stops me from going, oh, there isn't any evidence, or maybe I should just drop thinking about it, is the weird artifacts, the stone carved artifacts. Because I've recently I got to go to the Petrie Museum in London. I was invited as part of a research team to go and scan all of the pre-dynastic vases, and it was incredible. I mean, it was so scary. I got to hold them. They were literally just like, yeah, wear gloves, but if you can just move them. I was like part of the process of putting them in the scanner. And on the team of researchers, we had a bunch of different people, but there were some engineers, and I've spoken to like stonemasons and people who are really, really qualified and know what they're talking about. And it's really interesting to see just their perspective from like a skill set level of them being like, this is utterly unexplainable, how some of these artifacts were created. You got two options. You have lost tools in the archive, lost skill sets that should not be attributed to pre-dynastic stuff. And yeah, that's something that like it really sticks me until we like solve the riddle of how these how stone was used and made and manipulated and worked with. It's such a cool mystery. And these artifacts are so odd. The fact that they just turn up around the Ice Age, they turn up, and then they stop being made around the second dynasty. And I was like, that's so incredible that it's like it's all in that gray area that I'm fascinated with, that pre-dynastic time from Göbekli Tepe to the pyramids. Stone was being used and made in the most fantastic way that's just so unexplainable. And for me, that's like a big sticking point that we're like missing a massive chunk of the puzzle, because the engineers they're baffled. The one thing that they're sure of is that it cannot be made by the known methods of like stone artistry that we attribute to that time. Like it can't be like I hate to use the word precision because it's such a buzzword now. Like, but
everyone gets their
like,
calipers out.
Yeah, but looking at like the scan results, these things have been like they've been scanned from every which angle and modeled, and then you can pull it all up, and the results are just amazing. Like there's precision that's like you can't quite find with the human eye. It's only when it comes up on these scans. And the same thing is mirrored on the other side of the world in India with the Barabar caves. It's that same unexplained polishing and precision. And like at least 25 expert stonemasons have gone and seen for their real in their real eyes and with their real hands, and they've looked at all of the data that's come out of all the testings and the scans, and they've gone, this is unbelievable. And what was interesting at the Petrie Museum is I was speaking with the lady who is in charge of all of the artifacts. She knows the artifacts, like everything about the artifacts. She knows like where they were found, she's worked there for years. And what was really interesting is that she was so fascinated with our project because she had no idea really like what stones they were made from. Because she knew where they were found on the graves, and she knew all about Petrie history. But she had no idea like how thin it was. And so this specialist guy was explaining to her about how it's 2 millimeters thick, precisely. Yeah. It was like a mini vase that has, so you have them on massive scales, and then you can scale it up and down. So they're the scales go, some of the size of like this and some are like this. And she was like, it's 2 millimeters exactly all the way around. This thing had to have been done on a sort of lathe turning thing, which wasn't supposed to be invented for thousands of years. And it was really interesting because she was like, oh, I'm fascinated because I had no idea. I don't really know anything about stone. I don't know why that would be. And she was learning about why it was interesting, because she was like, oh, I think it's really cool because they're old, but and I was like, okay, that's where I think lots of people, it's really useful when you have lots of perspectives from different people. So really appreciate academic perspective, really appreciate artists' perspective. Really appreciate engineers, stonemasons. One guy was like a specialist bike maker, so he did engineering, but from like precision mechanics and things, and his interpretation was really interesting as well. So I think it's really, really valid to get as many eyes on solving the problems and looking at it upside down. And
yeah, one thing I'm sure if we went back to like an Egyptian stonemason's workshop, I think we would be blown away at what they were doing and their resourcefulness and the tools that they had, all the specialist tools that they probably made to do these exact jobs, which haven't survived, for obviously in the ground for thousands and thousands of years. The one thing I wonder if there's some mismatch between our modern perspective and an Egyptian's perspective, an ancient Egyptian's perspective.
yeah.
Like, let's say you gave the stonemason all these tools to do the job, and he was like, "Oh, I can't do it." But I told him he had 5 years, 10 years to make that artifact with these tools. I wonder if he could do it. And I wonder if we underestimate how much physical effort they were willing to put in time after time, because it was what Pharaoh commanded. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Well,
I'm sure
this was before pharaohs. These artifacts are pre-dynastic, so this was before a pharaoh would order anything. Some of these vases are found in graves that go up to the Ice Age. So they found like 10,000 years, and then the last, very, very last ones pop up in the graves of very, very rich people in the first and second dynasties. So they're kind of not even Egyptian. There are some Egyptian copies where they try to recreate the same thing and they get nowhere near. So if, for fairness, on the Petrie project, we scanned the pre-dynastic vases, and then we scanned the very best, most accurate, like the ones that we think were the best copycats from the different dynasties, like 26th dynasty. And when you put them into the scanning machine, even though they look pretty similar, when you pull up the data, it's just completely incomparable. It's clear. It's like a real Jordan trainer sneaker, and then like a copycat from Shein, and you're like, nah, it's not the same quality. It's just absolutely not the same.
You just tell the difference.
And the same with like the Barabar caves in India. The problem that we have is that according to like the archaeological timeline, is they're only allowed like 12 years to be made, because when you attribute them to the kings that are like inscripted on the walls, there's only 12 years between one king and another king in the like historical timeline, which means that the king would have to commission that cave to be built like right away, day one of his kingdom, and then it would be transferred to the next king. And these stonemasons are going, no way. Like you said, maybe 5 years for a little vase might be possible if you had the 5 years, but 12 years for a room that's the size of like all finished, all polished to this impossible granite polish that's like translucent to the eye. They've polished it so well that it is microns away from being glass, like modern day glass. It's utterly like the technical problems that you come up against. It's really annoying to think about, because there's no real answer yet until we investigate it further. But it does prove a big issue of like, just how did they do it?
Do you think?
I'm sorry. I was going to say, Johanna, when you were saying that the some of those stone vases go back to the time before pharaohs. There's a lot of interesting stuff that's going on in pre-dynastic times that alludes to the fact that people are certainly achieving great feats long before or in a time where the evidence of how they did it doesn't really survive. Like, a lot of these, I'm reading I have the Compendium of Ancient Egypt, or the Companion to Ancient Egypt, like by Blackwell and Wiley. I picked it up in Luxor. It's just like a high level textbook on ancient Egypt. And I was reading about some pre-dynastic pottery and vase work. And the scholar that wrote that chapter, he was saying that it certainly seems to him like some of these things were turned on a lathe 2,000 years before we have evidence for the lathe that appears on I think it's a tomb wall from the late New Kingdom. But what's interesting is it brought me to Johanna. You're interested in the stone circles that are around the world, and these vases that are being found in Egypt now. A lot of early archaeology is really messy. It's done very quickly, and it's not logged and categorized correctly. But if you go to the Nubian Museum in Aswan, you can see these 6,000, 7,000-year-old tombs of these sand pit burials that have these hard stone vases in them. Now, I don't know that we know exactly what vases those are, if those exact ones are cataloged, but you can tell that they're made out of, serpentine and some kind of, they're in black and white, some kind of brightly colored granite. But anyways, this goes all the way back to the time of the Nabta Playa circles. Have you heard of this, Stefan?
I think I have heard of Nabta Playa,
This is, I think it's 5,000 to 7,000 BC in Egypt. This is
lower. I call it Lower Egypt. It's Upper Egypt, right?
Southern Egypt. But yeah, Johanna, you had a really, really interesting question for Stefan about stone circles. Now, this isn't something I know anything about, but I'm looking forward to hearing about it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I was like, what would be your favorite standing stone, like megalithic site? Either if you could visit it, or maybe you haven't visited, it could still be a favorite. And do you see any link between the stone circles and different countries? Because widely.
What would be the one I'd most love to visit? I think the ones I would most love to visit off the top of my head are the stone monuments in Brittany. There's like whole avenues of stonework, and they even have one. It's the largest stone that was ever moved in prehistoric Europe, and actually fell down. But this thing is like the size of an Egyptian obelisk. It's like 300 tons, absolutely massive stone. And what's interesting is they think it fell down in the Neolithic period because later Neolithic people took chunks from it and used it in like graves. So they're pretty confident it fell down like way in prehistory. So their engineering wasn't quite up to scratch yet. They had done well cutting the rock and moving the rock, but however they set it in the ground was a failure. But yeah, those ones I think I would love to visit the most in terms of like Neolithic monuments. I mean, of course, and like Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, all of these places would be incredible places to visit as well. As for whether I see a connection between them, I think I do. I don't know about across continents. I think like all the Neolithic monuments across Europe and the Near East, they're obviously inspired by a similar culture. We know from genetics that the farmers of Europe had spread out from the Near East. So I think, even if it's a stone circle in the north of Scotland or one in like Turkey, there might be a similar worldview underpinning like why they did that. I don't know if I don't believe I see a connection between like a monument in, say, Europe and the Americas or something like that. Like, I don't think it ever crossed a hemisphere like that. And I think for me to think that, I would need to see some other evidence of contact between those two groups, because it's too easy in my mind to just think, well, there's going to be some similarity between what humans do, because we're all humans, whether it's a human in the Americas or Africa or Europe or Asia. At some fundamental level, we're going to do similar things. And, maybe there's only so many ways you can move a big rock. I don't know. So for me to like think that these monuments across a huge geographical distance are connected, I think I would need some other evidence of connection for that, in my opinion.
one thing I find really interesting. Are you familiar with Robert Garland? He's
Robert
a
Garland,
he's
the
he's
name
a
rings a
he's a
bell.
classicist. He's got some really popular lecture series. He was talking about how he thinks that it's in one of the lecture series that he's done. He was talking about how he thinks that there is evidence that alludes to this era when, kind of like you were saying, from Europe all the way to Asia, these standing stone circle monuments and the cultures that built them, they have a web that connects them through, very scant evidence. And he said something that I had no idea of, was that there is an imprint, or it's either an imprint on one of the stones, or the spear point, or the spearhead was found in the ground, but it's a Mycenaean spearhead that was found on at Stonehenge, either imprinted into the stone. I think it was actually imprinted into the stone. And he said there, he was like, he just said that he thinks that there was an era when cultures, I guess pre-bronze, I mean, that's a Bronze Age culture, but Bronze Age and pre-Bronze Age were interconnected throughout that European up to, Asian Minor area. And I find that really fascinating. And I think that when I first got wrapped up in this little world, and I was, hadn't really, I don't think anybody knows exactly what Atlantis is. But it ended up sending me down rabbit holes where I realized, like, okay, but there really is something to these ancient cultures being connected over vast areas. Maybe it isn't going across the Atlantic Ocean, or maybe it isn't carrying all the way across the Pacific, but these are little interesting rabbit holes to dive down. And I really liked you and Mini Minuteman, the other Milo, y'all's video together, where you were talking about how the story of Atlantis possibly could be carried down from a larger than average Neolithic village or something like that, but anyways, I think that this study of looking at these different ancient cultures and how they connect to each other is really interesting. So a question that I had for you, Stefan, was, coming from your point of view, what do you think is a fundamental misunderstanding of the ancient world that some people have when they're looking for Atlantis? Like, what is something that you see there that, like, the average person, they should know as they go into studying Atlantis?
I think not just people who believe in Atlantis, but it's so easy. Can I take this hat off? It's jingling in my ear. Sorry, I don't want to ruin the festive vibes. It's hard for me to think with the bell jingling. I think it's always easy for us to underestimate the skill and intelligence and ability of people, especially thousands and thousands of years ago. It's so, it's easy to underestimate their intelligence, and it's easy to underestimate their determination. I mean, for example, like, there are all sorts of interesting examples of really long distance trade and connections, like you said, in prehistory. And a famous one from Britain just this year was that one of the stones from Stonehenge might have come from the north of Scotland.
Yeah, like the top.
Yeah, like as far north in Scotland as you can get. Yeah, around Orkney. And the effort to move that rock that far, just the sheer determination it would take, and it's just hard to understand their motivation. It's so, because we don't do that now, or if we do it with a truck and a plane on a road that someone else has built.
Yeah,
like it's so hard for us to wrap our minds around their determination and their motivations. And I don't. So this is where perhaps an Atlantean, I would disagree with someone, an Atlantean, not that they're from Atlantis, but someone who thinks that there's a more advanced civilization out there than we think. I think yeah, I think they might underestimate just how much effort someone in the Neolithic period was willing to go to move a rock. I don't think we need any more technology to explain why that rock would be moved. I think it's just explained by their raw determination to get the job done.
People don't understand if you don't know the geography of England, but from Scotland, when you go down in England, you're going to hit the north of England, which is like Yorkshire and mountains and dales, and you've got no highways or motorways to take this thing down. It's incredibly hilly. It
would have been heavily forested back then too.
It's almost like, oh my god, yeah. That's like it's insane. Yeah, it's a long way. Specifically needed that stone. Like when all around that area where Stonehenge is, you can find so many amazing, lovely other stones. Like
they could have used any stone. Yeah,
they could have used any stone. So then you think, okay, well, why that stone and why from that far? Is there a particular, it could be symbolic, but could it be practical? Was there some sort of like they needed? It looked like they pulled stones from everywhere. Like they pulled the Welsh stones, the English stone, and the Scottish stone. It was like this big. Every corner of Britain was pulling stones.
Yeah. I think a hyper conservative archaeology answer could also be. So in Mesoamerica, one of the things that we have to do if you want to learn about the Olmecs, or you want to learn about a very ancient culture that Spaniards had no connection to when they, during the time of contact. Like if you want to study the Olmecs, a way that you interpret some of the archaeological data is you can look at what later Mesoamerican cultures were doing, right? Oh gosh, I forgot where I was going with this. Sorry, I'm trying to connect two different cultures here. What were you guys saying 1 minute ago? I had like a circle of thought.
Well, we're saying about how we're pulling the stones from. There's one from Scotland, one from Wales.
Oh, okay, here we go. So, so if we want to look at ancient cultures in the classical world, one of the things that we can do possibly is, we know that the Romans knew a lot more about the ancient classical world. I'll just say the Mediterranean world and the broader world around it. The Romans definitely knew a lot more about it than, at least directly in many different aspects than we do today. There's a lot of things that they were privy to that doesn't survive. And it may be the way that they organized their government. Once the emperor came into power, you couldn't just have 1 million people standing around doing nothing. You have all these, so the Roman Empire, they're getting the grain from Egypt, right? So they don't need farms upon farms upon farms, around Rome, maybe in the way that they did before they annexed Egypt. So you have this entire labor force that's sitting around doing, that could potentially be sitting around doing nothing. So you've got to put some of them in the military, and you have to have a workforce, and you've got to pay this workforce with taxes to keep these people submissive, essentially. And so you have to have, government sponsored, labor activities. So, hey, we're going to build this temple. We're going to build this forum. We're going to build this temple out here. You got to pay people and give them something to do. And so in the way that we study Mesoamerica, like if we want to know more about the Olmecs, you can study some of the things that the Aztecs are doing, even though that's 2,000 years separated. There are cultural similarities there. Well, the Romans may be alluding to us what's happening in ancient Egypt also. These big temples are being built, one, because it shows off the wealth and the power of Egypt and, inherently the pharaoh, but also Egyptian people need something to do because Egypt is so fertile. You have so many people sitting around that need to be paid to do something. And to have a well-functioning society, you have to have this labor force. So a hyper-conservative argument could be that, and I'm no expert in Stonehenge or the people that's there, but you have a high chieftain, you have these farms, people need something to do, they need to be rewarded for it. You start erecting, these huge monuments. It's just something that benefits your society. That's like a hyper conservative archaeological answer.
I would consider that a very good answer, personally. Yeah.
Where does everybody sit with the idea that rock has properties in it that, like, from a scientific point of view, you can access certain like electromagnetic energies. Like it's markedly, you can literally go with like equipment, and you can, the reason why these ancient sites were picked by the ancient was because somehow they were also attuned to the fact that there's like crazy energy sources that are underneath the temples. It happens in Karnak, it happens in Glastonbury. Do you look into the science behind some of what, like the science of the magic is kind of what I call it? Because a lot of the time when something appears a bit too woo-woo, people can write it off and go, you know, whatever, energies. But now there's like a lot of measurable data that goes, no, there's something happening at specifically at these sites. And it's actually like the makeup of the rock. If you look, people were specifically, especially in Egypt, they're specifically getting granite and diorite that have over 50% quartz, because quartz has this like amazing ability to retain energy and piezoelectric energy. And do you think that factors in at all into the decisions of which ancient stone was pulled hundreds of thousands of miles?
I would be skeptical of that personally. I fully believe that these sites were chosen in a way because it resonated on, like, these humans are not robots, right? These things, they really resonated with these people on some sort of emotional level, I'm sure. And there was...
Yeah. Do you think under the emotion, that there's a scientific reason why people are emotional? My example would be, because I went around all the ancient sites. I went to Egypt a bunch of times, and there was one particular site at Karnak where I had an experience which made me completely understand why ancient people used to worship statues. And because before I was like, all right, like, it's just a statue, like it's literally a lump of rock, like whatever. But there's this particular statue at Karnak that is still, it's in situ, and it's not open to the public. You have to get like special permission and whatever. And I went into the little chamber where it is. It's this big 6-foot diorite crystal statue, and I kid you, and I'm not someone who got really, I'm not particularly like sensitive or spiritual or anything like that. I was like following the science of everything. And I walked into this room, and it physically felt like someone put a cattle prod down the back of my neck. And you know, when you get like pins and needles and goosebumps where the hair on your body stands up and it goes, bzz. I had that on every single tiny hair on my body. Everyone got weirded out when I was like, the hairs on my legs stood up. Everyone was like, she's got hair on her legs. I do, but like it was the most incredible physical, and I'd never experienced that in any ancient site anywhere. And people are experiencing things, and then people's cameras were doing very weird. There was like physical issues with tech was getting interfered with. And we were all like looking down and like working this out, looking at it from science, like what's going on, and then went back, and people were measuring things with EMF rate, and it turns out there is readings that this statue has somehow, like, I don't know, it's got something in it, but where you're not going crazy, you're having an emotional reaction, because, and a doctor explained it. There was a doctor on the tour, and he was like, we are water, and our brain waves, and you've gone through an electromagnetic field, and of course you're going to feel something. So for you, it interpreted it as in this like weird buzzy, like you literally felt the electrical field. And I was looking at it from science going, okay, that's what was happening. Okay. But if you're not, you're looking at it and you're going, the statue is alive. And I was like, I completely get why ancient people used to move rock, specific rock. You would put it on certain electromagnetic fields. In Egypt, there are certain areas, and only in the temple areas, where trees don't grow up from the ground. They grow along the ground. And it's only in the like temple complexes you can get these weird trees. Something with the energy of wherever this is, it's physically doing something to trees, to humans. Like everyone's having a sort of reaction, and it's not magic, and it's not whatever. It's science. It's happening, and I do think that has something to do with the specific stone and why you would pull pull rock, 900 miles from somewhere because it has these properties. And I've never had it in any other place in Egypt. No other stone has made me feel funny or anything. It's just that one specific place that for some reason.
If I might slide in here real quick, I think I think I hold some room for something similar to that. I not throwing names out there, but one of the most respected Mesoamerican archaeologists. She's passed away in the last few decades, but she had this idea that that people experience strange things at archaeological sites because so many people have gone there in ancient times, and probably even before the ancient site was actually built there, it had some kind of significance. But she held some kind of room for this idea that so many people had been trying to go there to connect to something that is beyond our world, that it had thinned the veil between our world and the next. And that's where she thought that so many people have these weird experiences there. And I remembered that for years after that was said to me, and never really, I don't know what am I supposed to get from hearing that? Just like, okay, I know people say that they feel things when they go to the pyramids, and like Napoleon Bonaparte, he had some kind of weird experience when he went inside the Great Pyramid, and he comes out and his face is all white. He looks like he's seen a ghost, and his guys ask him, what did you see? And he goes, you know what? You wouldn't believe me. And then he never says it. But when I went to Machu Picchu, my grandfather had passed away a few months before, and he's really one of the main reasons that I love ancient history and exploration and ancient cultures. And he's the person that introduced me to Machu Picchu. He gave me this book when I was a kid called Lost Cities, and he would read to me, about Troy, Teotihuacan, Machu Picchu. And when I was at Machu Picchu, you're overwhelmed by how beautiful it is. And I'm standing there at the bottom of this huge granite gate. I'm looking up at Huayna Picchu on the back, and I pull out my phone to take a photo. And I'm on Apple Mail, which I never use my iCloud email. And I'm sending an email to my grandfather, who I had never emailed. It said richardmooney42@icloud.com. I've never sent a guy an email ever. And it had entered in the email, and the little thing was blinking like I was typing a message to him. And I just instantly remembered what I'd heard a few years earlier about there's weird things that happen at some of these highly venerated sites. But and then it made me think, like, there probably is something about these places that is untestable, undetectable. But that's more so of a belief, right?
But they are detected, like they're physically detectable. With you, we can read it with data. There was we were collecting information from the cameras because this statue, I don't know whether it's the quartz quantity in it or something to do with the crystals, but it was not photographing properly with proper DSLR digital cameras. Any other chamber in Karnak, we were taking really high quality, low res images because we were all, posing in the temples and being all like, yeah. But for some reason, this statue, the camera could not collect the data, and we were having issues on iPhones. We were having issues on DSLR cameras. So not only were people like physically feeling weird things, some people were going in and just bursting into tears for no reason at all. Like, it was very weird, and we weren't going in as a mass group. So it was, you went in. You're only allowed to go in at like 1, 2, or 3 people. So I don't feel like it was a hysteria thing where like a whole group of people were kind of catching things. It was very much afterwards, people were collectively having a conversation about what happened, and we were realizing. But then one really weird thing is that on the iPhone camera, somebody was trying to take a picture, and they took, when you can take pictures, multiple pictures in succession, it's like a fraction of a second apart, like, and one of them had the flash, and when it engaged the flash, it broke the iPhone camera and it whited out the screen for a whole photo, which apparently is only supposed to happen if you shine like a industrial torch into the lens of an iPhone. And then the photo after that was fine. And then I happened to, when the guy was showing me all of the pictures, I pointed out that the geotag only on the photo that had the weird flashback, the geotag jumped from being at Karnak Temple, from obviously whatever satellite it was pinging off, and then that one photo a millisecond afterwards geotagged to another side of Egypt. It was like on the Nile on the other side, and it was just this weird little like blip in the geotag. So there is something going on with technology like blipping a little bit, which again is like it's all measurable things on.
It can't be explained by our emotions, basically. Like you couldn't explain it away.
Yeah, it's like something physically tangible. And the same thing happened. Not the same thing. Similar thing happened on Easter Island. Normally I have a power bank, like a really good one when I'm traveling to like vlog everything. And my power bank can last me about 3 days normally. I went through it in a whole day because all of us, when we went to the different sites with the different moai, when you go up to the moai, in 10 minutes, your iPhone, it's dead. The cameras, some people had full DSLR cameras, like fully charged, and they would just go from full to blinking out. And they'd be like, hey, the people were going through batteries. We were on the bus going, has anyone got any juice, any charge? Because we're all losing it. And so something is happening, something happens to technology, and it's not magical, the ancestors. It's something tangible and data quantifiable is happening and interfering with us as humans and interfering with the electromagnetic. In fact, so much on Easter Island that they've set up they haven't got much data yet because I think it's only just started, but History with Kaylee sent me a paper. They've set up like a monitoring project on the island to actually monitor what's going on, because it's so much so that it's a danger zone to put helicopters too close over certain areas of Easter Island, because it's like it's not safe. So
I mean, I don't know to jump. Sorry to cut you off, but
no, go for it. Jump in.
I think I don't. People say things like energy, and I don't know what they mean really. So I'm skeptical of all of this stuff, but I can believe that, for example, with magnetism, like some rocks might be extremely magnetic for whatever reason. I think there's probably some part of our body that could subconsciously detect that we could maybe see that there was something about that rock that was different. I don't know for sure, but it's well documented that many animals can detect magnetic fields. And so perhaps there is room for something like that with that like particular statue in Karnak. I would be totally open to. I think there is room. Yeah, there is room that there's some part of us that can subconsciously detect.
That's a big thing. And I want you to keep fleshing this out. I think there's a distinction between. Sometimes about twice a year, I'll go camping out in Big Bend, Texas, out in the deserts out there. And, I won't bring my phone or anything and just try to, I'll think about these early Stone Age people who are wandering through here every single day without being able to sink their attention into a phone or something. And I always ask my friends that I'm with, and they get tired of me talking their ear off about ancient people, but I always think, how much more would you be able to perceive the ancient world if this is all you interacted with every single day? And so I think there's a distinction with modern technology. Sometimes we can look into the past and we can see that ancient people are aware of something, they're perceiving something, but they don't have the same understanding of it that we do. And I think that sometimes when people look into the ancient past, they maybe have this idea that ancient people must have had the same understanding of it as we do, rather than no, they're just perceiving it and they have their own explanation.
I think we have it the other way. I think it's the other way around, Luke. I think that we can't see what they did. Like they saw something that they were way more plugged in than we are, and we look through it through the lens of something. Well, like we're looking at it the wrong way around, and we're like we've got our many layers of glasses, and we're looking at it.
It's hard to turn off that like modern brain of ours.
Yeah, we're looking at it for a modern brain, and that's why we see so much stuff going. Oh, that looks like a helicopter and that hieroglyph, because that's what we see.
Yeah,
and we can't see, and we're looking, and that's what the puzzle of these ancient sites is. Well, you can't look at it through our brain. You have to look at it through, and they knew stuff that we have yet to rediscover. Like for sure, there will be things, skill sets that they just, I don't think anyone would survive a night in the Ice Age. Any modern person, if you plonk them back, they would.
So,
go on.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say. So since I knew that we were gonna move through.
Wait, if you were gonna switch questions, I have one more thing to say about that. One thing I wonder, and I just was thinking about it now when you were talking about Machu Picchu and the connection to your grandfather, and just generally feeling about these sites. One thing I wonder is humans are incredibly sociable animals. We're the most sociable animal on the planet, I would argue. I think that would be hard to deny. And yet, also, as a kind of apex predator, humans also are our biggest threat, right? Like, imagine you were transported back 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 2,000,000 years. Probably the biggest threat to a human group is another human group. And so I wonder if there is some part of our evolution that is so aware of when we're in a space that perhaps a lot of people have been, or that, we're just so there's just some part of our evolution that is so always on the lookout for that evidence of human activity, because it could be a positive, but it could also be a threat. It's like the people that see faces in toast or the face on the Mars. We might be so attuned, some part of us, to detecting the presence of other people, and maybe this affects our response to some sites. Like, some part of that is being triggered. This is just wild speculation from me. Like, I have no way to back this up, but I wonder about stuff like that.
Yeah, you're allowed your personal theories and wonderings. That's cool.
Yeah. So, okay, so since we're moving along here, I'd like to focus on our questions for you to allow you some time to like really expand and okay, so I'm gonna jump to my next question real quick. Is so when do you think that the first hominids arrived in the Americas, and how wide do you think that oceanic/sea travel was during the Ice Age?
Oh man, I've given up on having strong opinions about when humans arrived in the Americas, because there's just too much contradictory evidence. I think it's perfectly reasonable to think so there's two things to say. Like, humans could have entered the Americas at various times and not left like a permanent population. And then there's the permanent settlement of the Americas that obviously happened at some point. So I would say the permanent settlement of the Americas is very reasonable to think it happened 25,000 years ago, that at least some people were here. Maybe if you find like very anomalous sites much earlier than that, it could be people arriving in the Americas and not, for whatever reason, succeeding ultimately, or passing down such a small genetic ancestry that it's virtually impossible for geneticists to detect. But yeah, I think the permanent occupation of the Americas 20-ish thousand years ago seems to be reasonable. There's an interesting site in South America where there's a glyptodon that was butchered. And what's interesting about that is that with a lot of archaeological sites, the thing that the humans leave behind is not always dateable. Like if it's a stone tool, for example, you can't really date the stone tool. You can just date the context that it was found in. But a butchered animal, can directly be radiocarbon dated. And that came out at around 20,000 years ago, that this animal was butchered. And yeah, like I said, I really like that, because we're not dating the context and maybe burrowing animals or blah 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 moved it, all these caveats. Like, we're directly dating the thing that was butchered. So yeah, 20,000-30,000 years ago. But if by America we're including Alaska and that area, which was once obviously connected to Asia, hypothetically, people could have periodically been moving in and out of that area for hundreds of thousands of years, hypothetically. I don't know that I don't believe there's evidence of people making it further south into Americas at that date. But yeah, if we're including Alaska and Beringia as the Americas, then really all bets are off, because Homo erectus was living in China since like 2 million years ago.
Yeah.
And has been found as far north as southern Russia and Korea, which is quite far north, getting towards Beringia at that point, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years ago. But yeah, whether they stepped foot across Beringia into America, I don't see why not. But the challenge with all these things is that if anyone did make it that far, the population is so small and sea levels have risen so much that it would be extremely difficult to detect. But there is an interesting site in, I know this year that there's a paper coming out on a really far northern site in Siberia that is believed to be Homo erectus, I think. I was chatting to one of the authors behind that paper that should be coming out soon. And yeah, so who knows, really.
There's a, what you were saying about lacking evidence of around 20,000 years ago, people going further into the Americas. One thing that is interesting is there is actually a cave dwelling that was continuously occupied for 10 to 15,000 years in South America. It's on the east coast of South America, actually in Brazil. And they found the soot from fires being made in this cave that go back to 25,000 years ago. And that's just amazing that we don't find that's on the east coast of South America in Brazil. And the
last place you would think it would be.
The very farthest last place. So the Americas is a big puzzle. And then that kind of segues into part two of that question is, what do you think that because so much of this, the search for a lost civilization, takes place during the Ice Age, what do you think that oceanic and seafaring travel was like during the Ice Age?
Probably better than we think. With always like the ancient world, they're probably up to more than we think.
Could sail, right? I've heard this.
There's evidence of Neanderthals on places like Crete, and that was not attached to Europe. And
speaking of Crete, 3500 BC for the Bronze Age. I have no idea. I tie Minoan civilization so closely to the Bronze Age. That was stupid. But yeah. About 3500 BC for Bronze Age beginning. Yeah.
And as well, Homo floresiensis in the island of Flores. Like that's such an interesting one, because as we're all aware, Australia and the surrounding islands have never been attached to Asia. That's why their animals are so distinct, right? That's why they have kangaroos and koalas. They've never been attached to Asia. And yet we do find the stone tools of like Homo erectus and, that really interesting Homo floresiensis on the other side of that geographical divide. And there's no way they could have done it.
Or is that the hominid that was like 3 feet tall?
Yeah, really small chap and chapette. Yeah. I've actually got their skull. Hang on.
Oh, wow. I was thinking, just as a question, like just a fun question to think about, like if we could ever meet one of the very last human cousins, hominids that were not human, and we would meet them, like how much would we notice, or how long would it take us to notice? Wait, this is something. Wait, because humans are so amazingly varied in our shape, size, and there's people that like we almost can look alien to another, but we're all absolutely anatomically human Homo sapiens. But if you met one of the very last ones from before, I'm not sure in the family tree who is
like if you met a Neanderthal on the underground, would you know?
You know what I mean? If you sat opposite one, would it take would we instinctively know the difference and be like, this is not a human, or maybe we didn't, and that's why we had sexy time with them. Maybe they were really fit.
I think the difference has kind of been that much considering that fact. I think we would notice. I think they would look odd to us. I think something would be distinctive about them. Because they really have pronounced brow ridge, which modern humans have really kind of lost, and a much more rugby ball shaped head. I should say football's around, American viewers.
Oh,
sorry.
yeah.
But so I think we would notice, but clearly the difference was not so significant that it prevented us from spending a romantic evening together.
I did a DNA testing, and part of the results came up and said that I'm in the 95th percentile of Neanderthal DNA in my ancestry. So I've got I'm in the 95% more Neanderthal DNA than people that are currently in the database. And I was like, wow. And apparently it ties in very much with autism, and there's a lot of autism in my family. So I was like, like neurodivergent brains and Neanderthals. And
I interviewed the geneticist behind that study on Neanderthal genes and autism, and it was really interesting. And it wasn't that autistic people had more Neanderthal DNA, but certain areas of the genome they had the Neanderthal variant instead of a modern human variant, and maybe that's like connected to it in some way. But yeah, Homo floresiensis is this little chap.
Oh my gosh, tiny.
So small, like their face really tiny.
And when were they alive?
Up to like 30,000 years ago.
So humans would have bumped into them and been like, yo, bro.
Yeah,
why you
I think we killed them. I think we killed them all, personally.
Well, that's just...
It tends to be what we do.
Yeah, and then this is Asian Homo erectus. This is from Java. But interestingly, we don't have DNA from these specimens, and there's good genetic evidence that Denisovans lived in island Southeast Asia. So this... Oh, no, not this one. This is Sangaran 17. Sorry, this one is like 1.7 million years old.
Massive. Look at that eye socket.
Yeah, even Neanderthal eye sockets are much bigger than ours. Like, there's interesting evidence. It's hard to say for sure because we can't give one an eye exam, but they might have had much better vision than us.
I mean, probably they're just way cooler. The whole idea of a caveman, I've completely, like, I grew up being fed all the information of, like, you know, the joke of like caveman and Neanderthal, ha ha ha, and I'm like, no, they were so cool and strong. And
so this little chap, well, the main idea is that Homo erectus crossed over into these small islands, and then through evolution, island dwarfism became smaller and smaller. That's the main idea behind Homo floresiensis. But speaking of things that are lost, it is also possible that they're the descendants of a lost out of Africa expansion of smaller hominids, like Homo habilis or something, and that could also potentially explain their small size. But I mean, I know you guys were going to ask about, like, have we found all the ancient hominins? And I would say
that was one of Johanna's questions.
Yeah, my question was, do you think we ever have we kind of like solidified the family tree of evolution, or is there still like big gaps and mysteries and hominids could be popping out all over the gaff?
So many gaps, so many gaps. Like, we know a lot. But to put it in perspective, the most human remains we have outside of our direct species, Homo sapiens, is Neanderthals. And Neanderthals lived for about 400,000 years, roughly 500,000 years. That's roughly the time that we shared a last common ancestor with them. And we probably have like 600 Neanderthals that we found to cover 500,000 years. And that's the most, I'm pretty sure that's the most of any other species that we found. For Homo erectus, it's less. For other species, it's way less. So there are so many things we don't understand about our evolution. And I know you were talking about the dragon man, that massive cranium that was found in China you wanted to ask about. That's a really interesting example, because first of all, I do wonder, like, it is a huge skull. Whoever had that skull was a big guy. They're a big chap, no doubt about it. But I wonder if we're so used to seeing the skulls of normal people, like this is kind of macabre, but what's the boxer who just fought this week? The British boxer.
The last thing I
Gypsy
watched was
King.
the last thing I watched was the Tyson Jake Paul fight.
And I know like one boxer named Anthony Joshua. Tyson Fury.
Tyson Fury. That's it. Tyson Fury.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
What does his skull look like? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Tyson Fury's that's gonna be.
Yeah, he's gonna be a big guy. He's a big guy, and he's gonna have a big skull. So sometimes I wonder if that, maybe that hominin was just a massive guy even in their group. But yeah, what's interesting is that we have these skulls from China, and we also know from genetics that there was this group called Denisovans that lived in that area too. But we haven't got a DNA signature from the skulls yet, although they are working hard on it. So if in 6 months' time this is all totally irrelevant, don't blame me. But on the one hand, we could just think of them all as like, oh, they're Denisovans, they're a cousin of us and Neanderthals and blah, blah, blah. But we know from fossils like this, Sangaran 17, that hominins of various kinds have lived in China for 2 million years, probably. Certainly like 1.7 million years. And so these humans could be the descendants of groups like that, who we last shared a common ancestor with 2 million years ago, 2.5 million years ago, perhaps. Way, way, way more diverged than Neanderthals are. So there's certainly a lot of room to find different groups. A lot.
So you would say you're like, you're really open to finding a whole lost family trees of cousins of hominids.
I think it's most likely, yeah. I think that's most likely, yeah.
But finding cultures of humans or hominids that had skill sets that match stuff that came later. So if there was like cycles, that's for you, that's like not possible. But you can. Do you understand what I'm asking?
I understand what I'm asking you. Yeah, what you're asking. Sorry. Yeah, I think. Why do I hold that contradiction in my mind?
Yeah,
I think why I find like a more advanced civilization at some point in our evolution to not be likely, even like relatively recent, say in the last 20,000 years, is that I think humans are very, very good at expanding. And if there was some way of life that led to a lot of humans, being successful and creating children, I think it would expand. And so, for example, let's use the example of the Americas just to make it easy. Some people locate this lost civilization somewhere in the Americas. Mm-hmm. And I would wonder, in that scenario, why would we find the sites of hunter-gatherers all across America, and this one civilization that presumably had a way of life that would allow more children, more food, more life, wasn't expanding as much? Because some people always say like, oh, well, we have hunter-gatherers now and we have modern society now, which is 100% true. But look how far modern society has expanded at the expense of hunter-gatherers. Yet when at these time periods where the civilization could have been, it's like it's the opposite. Everywhere we look, we see hunter-gatherers, and we never see this civilization that in theory would have had a way of life that would have allowed for more humans, more expansion. Okay. That's what I wonder. But I wouldn't say it's impossible that the civilization exists, but I don't think the evidence supports it.
I find it interesting that the documented history that we do have doesn't go in a linear line. Every civilization goes in cycles, and we have like it's more of a progression of ups, back. So like, for example, in English, the Roman Greek were like way more advanced than British Dark Ages. Like we literally like went right back to Druid basicness, and and it's so much of it we just don't know about the Dark Ages, because medieval history was like my first ever my first anchor into loving history when I was like a teenager. I used to be a historical reenactor and like accurately replicate the clothes and accurately replicate the weapons and go and do shows and everything. Like we would do the Battle of Hastings, which is a big
the classic battle. Yeah.
The classic Battle of England. I'd go and like run around with my sword. So I really got into medieval history, and it was so infuriating just how little it was the reason why it's called the Dark Ages. Like we just don't know. We just completely went back. And it's the same, like civilizations like rise and fall and disappear, and then we find these whole things, especially like in the Amazon, we find these whole cities that we were like, well, we completely missed that happened. And I find it odd that when humans are around for so many hundred thousands of years, that we don't see that pattern of like cycle of evolving to a point and then going, and now we can really understand just how sensitive the world is to global catastrophes. They happen again and again and again, and things do get wiped out, and like really big scale bad stuff, which I think why so many people get hooked on the Ice Age, particularly having stuff that was like maybe more advanced before the Ice Age, because we were really knocked back into that weird gray time. I found it weird that we can see the cycles of civilization rising and falling like after a certain date, but then completely wipe off the table the idea that there were certain hominids or certain early humans that could have worked out some of the stuff that later humans worked out, but then lost it all because the climate changed, or everything flooded, and everybody who knew how to do that went away. And again, we're looking at stuff through the lens of like, we're looking for stuff that would be carbon footprinted, but what if some of these societies were like super zero carbon footprint and they didn't have things that would survive today? If you're going back to 30,000 years.
Yeah, so
I've got a lot to say about that, but you were just going to say something, Luke. So I don't want to cut you off. Yeah.
What I was going to say is, respond to her as well. But I think that led to a good question. If Plato's Atlantis is anything more than an allegory, coming from your point of view, what do you think is a hyper reasonable conservative explanation for, if it's based in reality, if there is something that existed 9,000 years before the time of Solon visiting the temple in Sais, Egypt? What could be some kind of reasonable explanation? And also a sister question to that is like, what I think I would be interested to know is what are some early Stone Age cities, villages, towns? What are some large settlements that we know of?
So for me, if there's an element of truth in Plato's story, speaking of civilizations rising and falling, I think to me the element of truth is not the date of 9,000 years. To me, it would be more that they were aware that there was this like Mycenaean civilization that built these incredible monuments, built these big cities, created this incredible art that in Plato's time they couldn't do, right? Like, because Plato, I think I'm right in thinking, or no, not Plato, sorry. Who was the one who wrote the Trojan War?
Homer.
Homer.
It's the period of living in the shadows of ruined palaces,
Exactly, yes, yeah. So there is this, I think they were aware that there was this earlier time where something else was going on. And I think if there's an element of truth to Plato's Atlantis, it might come from that understanding. So it could be the Mycenaeans, it could be there's some vague knowledge of this incredible Bronze Age world.
It certainly is not new to the Athenian, in the Athenian psychology, in their mythology of how the Greek world comes together. Ancient cities being destroyed by the sea, they're very familiar with it. I mean, you've got Helike, which is 376 BC. I mean, that Plato was probably, he may have been alive, or this was just before his time when Helike is destroyed. Santorini is destroyed by the sea, or volcanic eruptions. And Minoan Crete, probably finds its end because of this. Mycenae finds its end because of climate change and catastrophes happening. And, you know, deep in their psychology are these really sophisticated civilizations that came before them that had just dramatically fallen for means that still aren't entirely explainable 3,200 years later. So anyways, keep going.
Yeah, just about what Johanna said about why we don't see this ebb and flow of civilizations, you know, through the course of human evolution. There's some things I wonder about that myself. The first thing I would say is, like, sometimes things just take a long time and there's no good explanation for it. Like, life evolved on Earth billions of years ago, and it remained just single-celled bacteria until like 550 million years ago. And you could think, like, oh, how come it took literally billions of years for anything more advanced to evolve? And there's no good answers for that. You know, there's so many questions like this. It's like, the Romans weren't really missing any piece of knowledge or information or technology that would have prevented them from having an industrial revolution, right? But for some reason, like, it just wasn't aligned. It just didn't happen for them. And so sometimes things just take a long time. And I think if we're talking about, like, your example was of Roman Britain, you know, collapsing back into like a way of life that even in the Bronze Age and Iron Age, they probably would have thought, this sucks. Like, what are you guys doing?
Irrigation. We got on to like warring clans, like clothing is like, what's awful.
Yeah, it had gone back so far, but ultimately that was just a localized region, right? If you were in Constantinople, did you even know that Britain had fallen behind so much? Probably not. They were still pretty much living the life of a Roman. And I don't know if we have any, like, we have localized examples of civilization taking a step back, but I don't think we have an example of a clean sweep across the board, all humans everywhere are set back. And as well, thinking about the deep time in the Paleolithic, we've got to remember or keep in mind how small these populations of humans were. For example, I just interviewed geneticists who had sequenced the oldest modern human DNA ever recovered from Europe. It's like 45,000 years old. And they estimate from genetics that this community was just 200, 300 people maybe. And they're living across a large swathe of Europe. Like, imagine Europe with the entire continent of Europe maybe had 500 people in it, 1,000 people in it. These populations are so small deep in the Paleolithic that any death of an individual who had any knowledge or anything like that could really set a group back. I don't, you know, yeah, anyway, I'm sort of getting lost in my own words, but that's why I don't think we'll see this ebb and flow deep in time, because of small population.
What you said about, like, why didn't the Romans just continue that? They were sort of setting themselves up for the next industrial revolution. Like, why didn't they just think of that? That's interesting. So we get to like a point, but then it takes time. You have to really but then I'm thinking, like, for me, I see no reason why an anatomically correct human from a different epoch before, if we can essentially start from scratch and then go, like, if we can go like Dark Age to Roman, and or like if we can kind of wipe the slate clean and go right back to very early hunter-gatherer times, and then go up to something that we would call an advanced civilization like a Greek or Roman, why couldn't there be a sort of middle ground of that happening? I find it really I find it hard to get my head around why we have the ability to keep building from sort of 0 point to, let's say, Bronze Age, and we can do that in cycles, and just why is it completely impossible for a human? If we are, and like you said, all humans think the same, we do the same thing, we all kind of come to the same result, right? If we're thinking things through, like stone circles in South Africa look the same as in Scotland. So that's either we're sharing information or no one's sharing information, and everyone's kind of coming to the same thought point. Yeah, I do wonder why, because humans are so clever. I have a lot of stock in ancient humans, and I think that they can do things like the Denisovan jewelry has like drill marks in it, and I was like, okay, Denisovans had drills and they were using it for jewelry. Okay, I got to shift my opinion of Denisovan jewelry makers, because that's cool. And that's like
a tricky one. The context of that site is a tricky one, not to be an absolute killjoy, but that Denisovan jewelry is
the jade bracelet.
Yeah, that's the context of that is tricky. Not necessarily. But
if it is true, if the Denisovan jewelry is, I mean, just not to harp back to all of the stone stuff, but that stone stuff that's coming out of the Ice Age, that just it turns up. It kind of, especially the stuff in India, it's nothing ever like it is ever seen again, and nothing is ever found before that. It kind of just like turns up. And it's just really weird that this skill set, this really, really head-scratchingly incredible skill set, is turning up at a time it's out of the timeline. And I can't let that go. I really think that older humans did it, especially because the dating makes no sense for it's supposed to be the Barabar caves in India is supposed to be around 500 400 BC because of the inscriptions that are on there, but I really don't think the inscriptions are anything to do with the caves themselves. So I think they have to predate 500 BC.
What do you think of the idea that, like, at some point someone has to be the first to do something, right? Like, at some point you get a Da Vinci, a figure like that, who really knows what they're doing, and they just, help us take that step forward. Because I could, maybe there was I'm not familiar with this Indian site at all, so the Barabar caves. I'm looking at the pictures of it. It looks incredible.
It's absolutely mind-blowing, and it's only in the last couple of years when they've gone and done the studies out there. There's stuff there's alignments that have shown up that you can only see. You can't see with human eyes. The alignments and the symmetry only turn up with full 360 digital scans.
Yeah,
it's like, what? But yeah, they and aesthetically they share that there's like an aesthetic to like all of the weird minimalist, they almost look like sort of futuristic precision stonework, and it's all kind of from that block of potentially Ice Age to pre 3000 BC. And it's just weird that they share an aesthetic. It's almost like it could have its own Pinterest, like
I'm sure it does.
But it's some human, definitely human, could create stone like that in a time period, like almost in like the dark age of prehistory.
But 500 BC is pretty recent in the grand scheme of things.
Oh, no, I don't think
dating is correct.
No, I don't think they're from 500 BC. Like I said, there's some big maths problems. Just from this site in particular, like there are a couple of names that are inscribed on some, but not all of the caves. And they only give, they don't say that they make the caves either. They just say that the caves were donated to kind of the poor people. Like, so the King Ashoka donated this cave for the rainy season. Basically it's just like cattle or rain shelter. But they are so very clearly aligned to each other, the different sites. And there's like sound resonance. There's things in there that are, if you were just making rain shelter, it's quite clearly that King Ashoka like inherited these ancient caves and he's donated them as like a gifting to whatever. There's just no way that you would go to that effort. Like each cave is also tuned to a specific frequency, and the curvature of all of the shapes and the volumes and the maths that are involved in creating the volume shape of each cave. Not only are they connected to each other, but they each have like their own frequency, and the sound is positioned to a specific point in the room. which if you hit a speaker at 75 hertz, the speaker implodes. There's something going on with the resonance of the cave. Like there was a purpose to it. For obviously we're like scratching our heads what it was. The person who made it knew exactly what for and why. But
I can totally believe they built something with an appreciation of the acoustics. That's 100%.
But then if it's built with the acoustics, very specifically, then why would you donate them to the literally like the lowest class for shelter for the rain? There's no like it.
I guess a similarity to this would be like a Ptolemaic pharaoh coming in. He's now in charge of the Serapeum, and he uses the Serapeum to house people, right? Like that's not the original purpose of it.
People like the most common, like the group of people that they were gifted to, it was like literally the lowest commoner, and it was just a gift from the king, and it kind of it doesn't make any sense. So that's why I think they're pre 500 BC, because and then again, they go back into time of ancient India when and then whoever made those caves never made any more, and it's just them.
Stefan, Stefan, you said something really interesting a minute ago about when you said to Johanna, it's interesting that there have to be people who do the first thing. What are some when you were saying, there had to be a Stone Age, Da Vinci, there had to be a Stone Age Imhotep, like a guy who just has an epiphany and does something that's never been done before. What are
woman? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. What are some examples that come to us, pre 6000 BC or something, of people leaping ahead in time and achieving, some kind of feat that maybe wouldn't be prominent or common until thousands of years later?
I don't know. One thing that's hard in archaeology, right, is we only get a snapshot, so it's hard to say how common something was a lot of the time when we're talking thousands of years ago. What are some places that really pushed the envelope? I mean the culture that was producing the T-shaped pillars and all the stuff around Göbekli Tepe, that's clearly a moment in time where it seems like something changed in that region. What other examples?
I think there's going to be more T-shaped stuff coming out, because obviously, like we know, if we use the same logic, like stone circles pop up in different continents, like humans all get to the same end at the same end, right? So like I feel like if there's stone circles everywhere, there will be T-shaped pillars. Like I think there's a good chance that there's going to be other T-shape.
I think so. I think we're going to keep finding evidence of those monuments going further and further back in time. Yeah, if they came out tomorrow and found a site that had those T-shaped pillars, but it was like 4,000 years older than everything we found so far, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
Have you been to the Turkey?
No, I've got to go.
It's insane, because obviously you see the videos of it, but where they are is so remote, especially like Karahan Tepe. You have to trek. Like now they actually put you in a minibus and sort of shoot you up the hill. But back in the day, they are up high on a hill, and when you're up there, up where the Tepe thing is, you can see for like Karahan. You're just standing there going, I can see it was like Simba as far as you're like. And I was like, these places are, again, why would you build it at the top of the hill? Like logistically, guys, it's making it so much harder. Like,
but for the same sensation that you felt then at that moment.
But like logistically, getting these T-pillars like up, and it's over the terrain, and it's a lot. And also the size, it's big when you're there, and we've only uncovered like the 4-5% of it, and it's just so big, and nobody lived around there. So it's obviously it's this massive work complex and temple complex or whatever. For me, I feel like they were universities. I think my best, if I was going to stab a guess at what these things were, I feel like it was a site, like a kind of learning center, learning place, a place where you could gather and exchange information, and you would encode things like animals and iconography and whether or not they're stars or not or whatever. But I feel like it's like a university place in my mind.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Stefan, what do you think about the psychology of behind sites like this? Like, what is the precipice that makes some, that makes it, we call them officially they're hunter gatherers, but what makes somebody do that? What's your thought on that?
I don't know. I think there's some important reason. I don't know if you can hear my child crying in the background, can you?
Oh, if you need to run and comfort a child, of course. We can keep chatting away.
My wife is downstairs. I think it's just my two kids fighting. I just wondered if you could hear that. I don't know if you...
Just shout, is everybody alive?
Yeah.
Is anybody bleeding? Okay, good, carry on.
Yeah. They're probably fighting over advent calendar chocolate. But there's some... I think humans love to... We have this thing in us. We do like to show off, and I don't know. I just wonder if now in our time we're so busy doing all sorts of random things, and every second of our day is accounted for. I'm looking at this live stream counter ticking off every second, and I just wonder if psychologically people who could only mark time in terms of like the passage of the seasons, right? They would know when a day had passed, 3 months had passed, but they didn't know when a second had passed, when a minute had passed. I just wonder how much more time we have when we don't have a clock and we don't have to go to work. What does that do to our minds? What can we achieve when all that busy work is just taken away? But there's some driving, there's some thing compelling them to produce these monuments, and it's not just going to be a spiritual thing. Like, there is no real divide between like a spiritual task and an economic task. These things are all intimately connected in a way, and I suppose I kind of liken it to building a medieval cathedral. It's like they didn't have to go to all that effort, but their religious view, their worldview, and the economic situation that they found themselves in allowed them to create these incredible works of art over generations, like several generations it would take to build a medieval cathedral. And I wonder if there's something similar going on with a site like Göbekli Tepe. They have this, as Johanna said, this feeling of being like Simba on the mountain when they're up there. It's so important to them for that. But they also have the need to gather large numbers of people together to get crops and hunt animals. And so these like partly religious reasons, partly economic reasons are bringing all these people together at one spot. And it's like humans just can't help but mess around when we're in that scenario. I don't know whether we're going to build a medieval cathedral or build Göbekli Tepe. Like, that many people gathered together is probably going to do something. We're probably going to do something. That's just what I think.
It's such a fascinating place to try to put yourself in the shoes or in the mind of somebody like that. Where does the idea come from that I'm going to quarry a massive stone out of the ground, bring it to this particular location, and then I'm going to erect it? I just think that it's such a leap from their day-to-day lives. I mean, if these are hunter-gatherers and foragers, of course that's not all that they're doing. We kind of simplify them and put them in a box like that because it's neat. But I just think that that's so amazing that people would make a leap like that. It's almost like the bow and arrow, storing energy, creating a piece of technology that stores energy and then unleashes it.
Yeah.
I mean, where the hell does that come from? And I was just curious if but maybe it's one of those all-time great mysteries of, and that's another thing is, here's a great question. Before Göbekli Tepe, do we see any stone houses, or are stone monuments? Do stone monuments come before stone houses?
I think the houses come first.
Do
What's
they really?
I mean, as far as I'm aware, we could find like another site. You think it's the other way around?
Well, on Easter Island, it's the other way around. They have thousands of stone moais, and they have no stone houses to live in. Well, they have like rock houses, but that's not the same. They're not like carved, built, aligned. And I did find that odd. I was like, if it was me, I'd want to live in a nice stone, sturdy, warm house, and not build my house out of like wood and hay and have to change it every week because the hay would go manky and it would fall over. So I was like, I would kind of be like, guys, can you build me a house and then build me a stone statue? But priorities was obviously different. But I feel for the Göbekli Tepe, I feel like if I was going to take a stab just from being there and researching it and everything, the walls, the pre-pottery Neolithic walls that hold it up were not part of the original design of the T-circle. The cemented floor and the erected T-pillars, like 100% were there before, because you can literally see with your own eyeballs when you go around, they're using the wall to prop up broken T-pillars, and they're recycling bits of other T-pillars that have already fallen down by that point in the walls. And like you said, you can't date stone, you can't date the T-pillars, you can only date real bits of organic matter that are in the very bottom layers of the wall. And that's where you get the date of like 9,600 around that time BC. The wall and that like style of wall, you can see that in like Jericho, which is around 8,000 BC. It's that pre-pottery. So I feel like there were two stages to these sites, and there was the people who made the pillars and carved the pillars and erected the pillars, and they're freestanding. And some of the sites have walls and some don't. So I feel like it was I think there was like a second season of people that were using the site and were building the walls and repairing the walls and getting them held up and potentially adding roofs. But then I think that the original like university lecture theatre idea or the standing pillars was probably from people before that.
You mentioning the pre-pottery thing has made me remember something. Like, it is kind of interesting. Speaking of how ideas come and go and there's seemingly no justification for it, it's like they could build Göbekli Tepe, but they couldn't make a pot. Isn't that interesting? And in Asia, it's the opposite. They had pottery 20,000 years ago. Like, the oldest pottery in the world is all from China and Japan. Over 20,000 years ago, they had worked out to make pottery, but there isn't like a Göbekli Tepe. And like, I don't know. To me, it all just seems so random. Like, it doesn't seem like there's any pattern to it or any. Like, this is one of the main reasons I don't think there was this big civilization sort of guiding anyone's hand, because it just seems so random. Like, you can do Göbekli Tepe, but you can't make a pot. Isn't that so funny? Like, it's so interesting.
I see the pattern to it. In my eyes, I see a period of time where people were insane with stone. Really old, like we're talking couple, maybe say 1,000 years before the people who built the walls to re-prop up Göbekli Tepe, the people who were carving the animals and getting these like really amazing anatomical like jaguars and whatever and birds and everything. And at the same time in India, you've got the people who are doing like the cave stuff potentially, or you've got the people who are doing the stone vases. These are the people who don't know how to make pottery. The potter's wheel hasn't been invented. They don't have metal, yet they can do stone. And I see a pattern in it. I see this like, yeah, it's kind of the wrong way around. There was like a period of time where humans were really good with stone and then it kind of, then we learned how to do pottery and we left the stone stuff. And then we picked up the stone, being good at stone again, more in like the later dynastic Egyptian time, but we still weren't quite as good as the people who could do the vases, the Göbekli Tepe carvings, like I see the opposite. I see a pattern. I see amazing stonework people, then I see pottery people, and then I see stone and pottery people. but the stone and pottery people were never as good as the first stone people. And yeah, I'm like, who was it, and how? If you didn't have the metal and you didn't have the wheel, why and how were they so good at stone and carving stone and manipulating stone? And yeah. Why is that first?
I don't know. I
why
wonder. Not? Yeah, I don't know. To me, I just feel like we just underestimate their determination to do something like that. I don't know. Like, this is a later time period, but I was looking at Egyptian stoneworking and Egyptian labor and stuff, and there is an interesting document that survives where it's like sort of like an audit of the entire country to be passed from one pharaoh to another after the old pharaoh died. It's like the new pharaoh comes in, they do an audit of like who their laborers are, where are they, what projects are they working on, all this stuff. I can't remember the names of the pharaohs now, but it was the pharaoh that built Medinet Habu, I think. Anyway, the numbers of people that they're like putting on these tasks is crazy. I think he gave Medinet Habu like 50,000 people to help build. And it's like, we don't know what he means by 50,000 people. Is that 50,000 individuals, or is it families, or, you know, extended families? You know, it's not so clear that 50,000 people literally means 50,000 people like in a line, but still, whatever it means, it's a lot of people. And I wonder, I've been wondering this whole time with the site in India. It is incredible. And if, you know, according to the inscription, again, I don't know much about the site, but you said it was roughly made in like 12 years or something, according to the inscription.
So, yeah. So if you're going to go by the inscriptions, and you're going to there's so many anomalies, but the inscriptions say they name two kings. One king donates some to the poor people, and another king donates. But the timeline of those kings is, it means that that cave would have to have been constructed, like literally ordered and constructed and finished in 12 years. Which is, yeah.
Do you think it's possible for 20,000 people to do it in 12 years? That's all I wonder. Like,
no, because the problem you get is that it's carved into the rock. You can't fit more than, if you had people working,
they couldn't all be in there. Yeah,
couldn't all be in there at a certain time, even if you had different people on different shifts. And also, how do you see? Because they didn't have, there's no evidence of like flames or torches, like how do you irrigate all of the dust that comes off when you are polishing down granite and doing granite? You can't have that many, but like breathing becomes a crazy issue. Like there's people
well, maybe the king wouldn't have cared how easy it was for them to breathe, just on that perspective, you know.
Yeah, but there's like some physical, the stonemasons were basically bringing up that this was their issues with it, and they were like, 12 years impossible. With the tools that we, you know, in this point in the record, they don't have the right metals and things, and it's it's like I said, they've polished on a not just a flat surface. Polishing is one thing, because you can kind of use gravity sometimes and push things back and forth, and you can make a flat surface really quite flat. But when they have intricate curve and arc, and we're talking about their complex, there's a 3-point arc. So like the trajectory of the curve changes at 3 points, and it is mirrored symmetrically exactly on the other side. The symmetry in these caves, they're up in the like 80%, and that's thousands of years later with all of the like dents and whatever. We're talking crazy symmetry that again only shows up on scans, not to the human eye. So you're in the dark, you're working, you know, up against other people, you're polishing on a curve that has a 3-point trajectory that is mirrored on the other side, and like there's so many like physical complications, like to the point where like they don't know how they would do it today. It is kind of the question. Getting granite to be 2 microns away from modern day glass, like that's how flat the surface is. It's just
you think
insane.
it's too much? You think it's too much?
Well, just having just in terms of like flatness and curves and geometry, but then when you start going into, it gets more and more complex the more you look at the data. Like I said, the reason why the walls at the side of the cave aren't like completely parallel and flat, they're curved inwards at these like really weird mathematical symmetrical trajectories, and they're like, why is that? And they realize because it's focusing the sound and it's focusing the resonance into like a specific point in the cave, which is around 80 centimeters off the floor. They found this like focal point, and then someone pointed out that's roughly the size of where a human head is for the average human who was sitting on the floor at that point. It would focus all the resonance into like that one place. And then there are caves that are like the alignment is, you think there are individual caves, but when they've scanned them and they've looked at them, they are perfectly aligned with a cave that's on the opposite side of the mountain. Which again, you're like, how do you line that up precisely? Yeah. As in, absolutely, they are. There's like a parallel. The exit to the cave, you've got this cave, and the entrance is on like a kind of weird parallel, and you're like, why do you do that? Why don't you just go straight, like get in and out of the cave? But the reason is because it connects and it aligns with another cave that's on another site, and they're matching each other. We don't know why that is, but just weird bits of data that makes it so complicated. And the more stuff they find, the more I go, I don't think this was the King of India commissioning this to be made for the poorest people so they could put their goats in it for the monsoon season. I think he had no idea about what this cave was.
What about, I mean, the sound thing I don't know about the site, but the skeptical mind in me says, like, let's say, to go back to Renaissance Italy, we look at Michelangelo's David, for example, and admittedly, it's marble, not granite, so it's a much easier thing to work with, I imagine. Not that I've ever carved a single rock in my entire life, but that's what people say. But Michelangelo also didn't have any modern measuring equipment that we have, and yet was able to create these incredible works of art, even though I'm sure he had more technology at his disposal than, whenever this cave was produced. But
do you mean the painting, sorry, or the statue?
The statue, I mean.
Oh yeah,
it's like he's still with his own eye could create that, and I don't know what the limits of the human eye are. Do you know what I mean? Like, he didn't have any sophisticated measuring equipment and still could produce that.
The stuff, the Greek statues and the Roman statues and the stuff out of marble, they're not. They are amazing, and they are amazing, like accurate human bits of art, but they don't possess the mathematics of the same thing.
Well, what about a cathedral then? A cathedral, for example, still is symmetrical. I don't know how accurately. But still, they didn't have measuring equipment like we do.
They had their own measuring system for sure, and there's a measuring system that's being used at Barabar. There's like the Barabar cubit or whatever, because the maths has been worked out. So they all had their own measuring system. It's more when you're creating something in 3D, like how do you keep the symmetry? How do you make one side exactly like the other? How do you mark that out? If you're using hand tools and you're hand chiseling and then hand polishing, like how do you make that? How do you keep the curve? And there is a difference in the Michelangelo artwork, is that it's not symmetrical. The faces are not. You're not, one side of the face is different to the other. One side of the hand is different to the other. And also, marble is a very different stone. And you're also allowed to have a whole different set of tools by that point in the historical record. You're allowed a lot of different.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. My daughter is screaming for daddy. Do you mind if I mute it and just take 1 minute? I'm so sorry to cut you off like that. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. We're going to make sure everybody's got their questions in for the final questions.
Just give me 1 minute. I hate to cut you off like that. I'm so
sorry. No, I'm not sure.
Here,
Well,
let's
do a
let's
call for action.
yeah, let's hit some soups here real quick. Jet Ison, man, thank you so much. Atlantis is not a myth. What do you think?
I happen to agree with you, Jet. I think it is. I think it is definitely some human remembrance of that cataclysms wipe us out.
Yeah, I think Plato he's definitely using it as a literary device to remind the Athenian people what happens if you have a poorly run government. But I think he's drawing on memories of ancient people. And I think human beings have a long history with advanced cultures and cities being destroyed by cataclysmic events. I mean, that this is happening in the Greek world during the Bronze Age. It's happening in ancient Peru 5,500 years ago. This is happening all over the world. So I think that this story of Atlantis is just like the most iconic example of somebody drawing on past human experiences. And he's writing it to remind the Athenian people that, this isn't going to last forever. We have to take care of what we're, we have to take care of the city and I can go on and on about Athenian democracy, but, or Athenian government. But no, I don't think that it's entirely a myth. Plato's description of it that he's drawing from Solon, who lived like 3 generations before, it may not be 100% correct. Some of his measurements might be off. Who knows, but I don't think that it is entirely made up like a lot of people think. It's honestly pretty effing great to have an open-minded skeptic on board, such as Luke. I myself am also an open-minded skeptic. Kudos. Well, thank you very much, Hyper Baroque. Yeah, I mean, I guess I have one foot in each side. I was talking to the Snake Bros yesterday, and I was like, you know what? I'm done with this label of like alt history or pseudo archaeology or whatever. Just I don't know. I just think that there's some people who aren't so crazy off on one side, but like to view some things from this side angle. And so yeah, about a lot of things I'm skeptical about. I certainly have a hyper conservative archaeology background in school. We even had anyways. But thank you very much. Yeah, I try to just I'm pretty conservative in my approach to things, but I also love to have an open mind. And I certainly, even as being like I'm openly a Christian religiously, and so I certainly have room for there are things in life that are just undetectable thus far. Of course, that's getting off into beliefs, but it also is connected to my views with archaeology. So where were we?
Sorry, I thought it bumped her knee on a kitchen cabinet. I'm sorry.
Oh,
You're all good. So here's something that I love to ask people. So my place in the ancient world that I love to escape to is Egypt's Middle Kingdom. I feel like it's kind of even though there's a lot of tumultuous things happening, in the first intermediate period and the second intermediate period, this little area of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt seems like this peaceful, sort of stable time in Egypt when you're living in the shadow of the pyramids. But the 18th dynasty isn't rocking yet. Egypt isn't quite taking over the Holy Land yet.
You go Middle Kingdom.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting little time period here.
I go Old Kingdom any day.
Sure. Well,
the dynasty was rocking.
The thing is, with the Middle Kingdom, you get to look at all the stuff from the Old Kingdom, but you don't have to like be a part of it. You can just appreciate it, but it hasn't gotten all grotesque and yet everything. Like it's not starting to get ancient yet. But that's my little like mental retreat that I like to go to. That's the place that if I could, yeah, if I could go somewhere in the ancient world, it might be that. So I'm curious, what is your place in this, span of hundreds of thousands of years? What is a place that you would love to be able to, hop in your spaceship and travel to in the ancient world and just observe it, or even just be in it. Like, what's your place that you escape to?
Oh, time machine for a day.
If it's just one day, then I've got to go back and see like a Neanderthal or Homo erectus.
Oh, you got to have lunch with a Neanderthal. You haven't lived.
Yeah, I've got to see. I want to know how much language they had, what kind of clothing they would wear, like all the stuff that doesn't survive at all in the archaeological record. Yeah, I'm sure I would be absolutely amazed at what they were up to. But I think if I was with them for 6 months, I'd get a bit bored. You know, in the Ice Age, it's going to be pretty samey. So if it was a time period longer than a day, I think, I don't know. I got to see how they built the pyramids, man. I just got to go see how they did that. Like old Kingdom Egypt, it would be crazy to go back to. Like, I think I mentioned in the text message to you guys when we were organizing this thing, you can't love archaeology and not love Egypt. I think, you know, it's
yeah, absolutely.
You've got it. I think it's everyone's like first love, maybe, and what got them into archaeology is all the incredible monuments of ancient Egyptians.
Yeah. You know, people, I get referred to because in Texas, you know, one of the things in our when you get a degree in anthropology or cultural anthropology or archaeology, a big focus here is Mesoamerica, because Texas is just it's a quick flight down into Mexico. And I have a close relationship with Dr. Ed Barnhart, and I've gone on lots of trips with him down into Mesoamerica. And that was really because it was accessible. It was very accessible to me, you know, through university. But my first love was always Egypt, and always has been. So I totally agree with you that Egypt is just. I told you, Hannah, I think we did a podcast after Peru, like in the day before I went to Egypt. And I was like, you know, I just don't know. Peru is so amazing, and just the setting of it was just so mind blowing. I don't know how it's going to compare to Egypt.
I was like, just wait, bro, just wait.
I was completely wrong.
And then he went to Egypt and was like, what?
just the Giza plateau alone dwarfs every other archaeological site that I had ever been to. And Karnak was really impressive too, but impressive in different ways. But Egypt, man, it's just, golly, it is. I've been doing a deep dive lately on the psychology of Egyptians, and you have to think, man, think about during the late 4th dynasty. You're living in the shadow of the pyramids, you know, but 4th dynasty is still pretty much, or, you know, Egypt is rocking pretty much until you get to the end of like Pepe II's reign and in the first intermediate period. But, you know, their perception of the world around them is just this vast wasteland of emptiness. You know, they probably know about the Tigris and Euphrates River that's far away, but it's not as bountiful. It's not as lush as Egypt. You know, their perception of their world just has to be that they are these divine people who were allowed by the gods to be able to live on the fertile oasis that stretches a few hundred yards on each side of the Nile. And this was the center of the world, if that makes sense. It's the center of their world. Yeah, I just think that's so interesting. And it's funny, you know, as a guy who's dived so deep into the hundreds of thousands of years of human history, you know, even you are like, well, if I could go anywhere, it would probably be, you know, just has gravity.
I'm just thinking of bang for your buck, you know. Sure, I think sure. Like another great option would be something like Persepolis, like the capital of the Persian Empire.
Yeah.
Because if you went at the right time, you could have people from all over ancient Europe and Asia there. Like you could chat to a Greek, an Egyptian, a Persian, someone from India, China. Like the Persian Empire obviously spanned all of those regions, and it doesn't have to be that, but at some points there are certain places that get really cosmopolitan for the ancient world. And in terms of bang for your buck, traveling back in time, somewhere like that might also be a contender, just in terms of how many people you could chat to.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is interesting. So how much of your time do you spend studying the late Stone Age, you know, the time that we're talking about, right now. I guess you're in the Bronze Age when you're talking about Fourth Dynasty, but you're also sort of at the end of the Stone Age because bronze isn't everywhere yet. So how much time do you spend studying the really late Stone Age, early Bronze Age? And I guess I'm sorry, Persepolis, you're into the Iron Age by then, right?
Yeah, that's like 500 BC or something.
Yeah.
300 BC, just before Alexander the Great.
Mhm.
I don't know. I mean, probably like you guys, I jump around.
Yeah.
Before, I used to read about human evolution a lot just for fun, and then when it basically became my job to present videos on that sort of stuff, I tend to read about different time periods now, just out of enjoyment. But I think once you're into history, I'm into any period of history. Like I'll be reading about like life on an 18th century warship, and then I'll be like, okay,
Absolutely.
so what were Neanderthals up to like 50,000 years ago? Yeah, I can just soak it all up. I may not remember it, but I can read about any time period, and I'll probably love it.
I actually just picked up Dan Jones' Henry V, the new book that just came out. I don't know if you guys have seen this, like at Barnes & Noble. It's in all the displays. I picked it up to read during the holidays, but it is so jarring to me because I'm not familiar with any of the English or French towns or provinces or anything.
You did check with me. I'm your British pal. I can
I need to. I need to like have a companion Johanna as I'm going through this. But no, I think that's so interesting. As a little fun fact, did you know that this is like I'm drawing on 3 years ago memory now, so I might not be exactly correct, but the word paradise I think comes from Cyprus the Great in Persepolis. I'm pretty sure he was living in Persepolis. But it was the word for his garden, and he pulled all of the most like extravagant and expensive plants and flowers that he could from all over the Persian Empire, and basically built this huge elaborate fountain pool garden behind his palace, and I think that palace is called Paradise. Anyways, that might be a little interesting rabbit hole to jump down.
If you're going for longer than a day, you probably want to be somewhere that's worked out, like sewer systems or something like that, or a toilet.
Yeah, ancient Americans had a lot of sewer systems. Actually, that goes back. Man, that goes back almost. Yeah, that goes back almost 4,000 years. There are these stone aqueducts that the Olmecs were making that go for, so they'd build up on top of this big hill that sits above this flooded plain. And so they build up on top of this big hill, and then, they'd find a spring up there, which is another thing that I think is amazing. Like Machu Picchu. I don't know if you've been there, Stefan.
No.
But Machu Picchu, they say that there's evidence there that goes back, people inhabiting Machu Picchu 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. And this is, I want to say it's 7,500 feet of elevation. It's amazing looking back at these Neolithic people who had to be exploring mountaintops, looking for springs coming out of the mountain. It alludes back to this time when people are exploring everything, trying to find a safe place to live that's elevated above these canyons that can flood every so often, and trying to find almost these islands where they can be safe and there's water coming out of the mountain. And then people live there continuously for 7,000 years, and eventually they build a canal. They cut out a canal from that spring all the way down into the city, and they have different aqueducts and canals running throughout the city where you have access to fresh water that leads to toilets, which lead to these aqueducts that just flow off and send the waste off down into the canyon. Like, that's amazing. In that very early history, I love thinking about, man, there were people here. At some point, the first people walked through here. And at what point did they think, oh, we should start exploring these mountaintops, trying to find a way to get fresh water? And if it's by accident, well, what the hell are they doing up there? I think where you're at is such a primordial, or your area of study is such a primordial, interesting interesting place to dive into, where it's so few things are certain, and trying to put yourself in the mind of these people is so mystifying. You know, I just think your field of study is so interesting, and there must be so many things that drive you mad with curiosity.
I think it's that one of the hardest things is, you know, in our time, there are so many people. You almost can't go to any corner of the world without people. Even if you go to the deepest, darkest Antarctica, there'll be people filming the sun for 24 hours. You know, you can't escape humans anywhere.
Yes, humans everywhere.
Yeah.
Can't be a hermit like the good old days.
No, you can't. Like, these people at various times, they really were the first people in all of these places, and that's such an interesting thing to imagine. It's so hard for us to picture, I think.
Talking about water, just a segue into the latest bit of information I found out this week, water sort of irrigation and things. I would be going back to the 4th dynasty because I want to see the Sphinx enclosure and the Giza, to see what's there and what the timeline is, because a new paper's come out analyzing, you know, there's always the argument of like, what came first, like, is the Sphinx older than the pyramids, or is like the Sphinx enclosure, like, when was that cut out, the erosion, and blah, 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 blah. But there's been a new paper that I want to shout out, Matt Simpson from Ancient Architects, and he did a really good video explaining that basically, because of the way that water flows, the Giza plateau is 120 foot high, like, plateau. It's also on the Wonk, which is heading from the pyramid down towards the Sphinx enclosure. And so the water that would have flowed across the plateau and down into the enclosure to be a factor in the erosion, because it is water erosion as well as other erosion factors. But they're basically saying that in order for that to happen in the way that it's clearly happened, at one end is more than the other end, you can't have had the quarry, the limestone quarry that's on the top of the plateau to make the pyramids, because it would interfere with the flow of water that would be running down into the enclosure. So they've analyzed it and said whenever the limestone quarry, which they can assume was for the casing stones for the pyramids, the Sphinx enclosure had to have been cut out first, and a while before, in order for enough water flow to have been coming down from, you know, rainy period stuff. So that's really interesting piece of information that has sort of come out this week from that study. So it just goes, okay, so you can kind of, like, puzzle piecing it together. You can go, okay, well, the enclosure had to have been cut out before the quarry that's just, like, literally behind it, above it, behind it.
I saw that video. Yeah, shout out.
Yeah.
He made a convincing case. I'm pretty open to the idea that the Sphinx is older than the pyramids. I wouldn't say 12,000 like some people say, but
no, I think no, but
it's older.
I think it kind of aligns with the idea that the enclosure, they cut it out, and that the Sphinx was some sort of sculpture. I feel like everybody who, definitely if you see it in real life, everybody can agree that the Sphinx head is just ridiculously small. And if we're gonna say one thing that ancient Egyptians knew how to do, is they knew proportions, and they knew how to do things really, really well. And it's so weird to have a head that's literally the size of that
especially during the Old Kingdom. I literally read this last night in that textbook I got from Luxor. After the fall of the Old Kingdom, bas relief tomb art becomes much more disproportionate than it ever was in the Old Kingdom. And really, Old Kingdom art is almost never surpassed in quantity.
Old Kingdom Egypt is just the most elite Egypt. They started out of the gate banging, made the best pyramids, the biggest stuff, the stuff that's still standing today. It was the most impressive stuff just straight out the gate at the beginning, and then it got very different later on. But interesting about the Sphinx enclosure, because there's I don't know, that's a very good argument. How would you get the water flow if otherwise it would pool, and you would see the same water erosion going into the being found in the quarry, basically, of the same limestone that the Sphinx enclosure is made out. It's all made out of the same limestone bedrock. And also at the same time, I want to see whether or not the carbon dating timeline is correct, that they did in the 90s and the 80s and 90s, they did 2 rounds of carbon dating all around the main Old Kingdom sites, like the pyramids and various tombs, and the carbon dating timeline came out very different to the academic timeline of like one after the other. They all kind of came out around the same 100-year period, carbon dating wise. And so yeah, I want to see whether they're all there at the same time.
Yeah. So coming in for landing here, I sent a question, or I sent a comment into the live chat here saying, send questions in for Stefan. So here's the first one, and I'm going to go through and try to detect them. They don't have to be super chats. I'm going to be looking through the regular chat as well. Just trying to find your questions for him. So if you send a question in, put his name in first, say Stefan, comma, and then write the question. Just like this one right here. So yeah, it says from Jet Ison, Stefan, do you think the world needs to know the truth about everything, or should it remain a secret?
I think it's important to know the truth. I think it's very important to try and keep in mind what's true and what's testable. Everything, I think we cannot possibly ever know the truth of everything. There's always going to be gaps, no matter how much we investigate. I don't think we are capable of ever knowing everything. But I think it's important to try and be focused on what is true. I think so, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Fuzzy Love, where does Stefano, think Atlantis is?
If there's a grain of truth to it, I think it's in the Mediterranean, to be honest. Like I said, I think if the grain of truth is an awareness of Mycenaean culture and that they lost something. So I don't know that Atlantis is real. I'm in the camp that it was an allegory to teach a lesson, but if it is, I think it's in the Mediterranean.
Yep. All right. Question: what do you think of consciousness development between hominids? Language about 300,000, 15 years ago. What did people talk about?
The weather.
Yeah, probably, definitely.
It's good today.
The weather, who farted, I don't know.
That's my wife.
Yeah, probably a lot of that. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't think language was a sudden evolution. I think there's probably been a lot of steps in ever increasing communication amongst hominins. This is why, if we were going back in time for a day, it'd be so interesting to see, like, 1 million years ago, Homo erectus, how were they communicating?
Right.
I don't think they've had a language as elaborate as what we're doing right now, but how close were they to it? That would be really interesting to see.
Man, I think that is so strange, right? Like, you see, I see in my parents' neighborhood here in North Carolina. By the way, for everybody watching, I am not at home in Texas. That's why you see my dad's office in the background. But there are these very friendly giant dogs that roam around their neighborhood up here in the mountains. And I think about them sometimes, and I think about early people. These dogs don't say anything to each other. They communicate in certain ways, and they know that they need to, stick together.
There's one now.
There's Obi. But I always think, like, that is a strange thing, right? For early hominids, they're hanging out with each other. They're roaming around in packs. But is there a time, you think, where they're not speaking to each other at all? I mean, it's a weird thought, right?
I don't know. I mean, chimpanzees communicate, and our last ancestor with them was 5 to 7 million years ago, probably. So I don't think there's ever been a time when humans, any of our ancestors, were not communicating. But obviously now we're at this extreme end of our ability to communicate is very detailed, very elaborate, very precise. And when that appeared, I don't know. It's an interesting one, going back to the ebb and flow of civilization and how much time has passed. We find skulls that you could think of them as looking a lot like us, that are 300,000 years old, like Jebel Uhud is a famous example, and it's been labeled Homo sapiens. But our brains evolve at the same time too, and we don't know if a human 300,000 years ago thinks the same way that we do now. It's so difficult to test. I think the only way we can test that, or the only way we can kind of get close to that, is when we see people behaving in ways that are obviously symbolic. And I think once we're doing that, like 100,000 years ago, maybe 130,000 years ago, there's there's a sign that something else is going on up there. But it's so interesting to imagine like a group of 20 humans sitting around a fire, not talking like we're doing now, right? It's so interesting. And who knows, it's obviously invisible to archaeology. We can't see their words preserved.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, man, it really is a mystifying time period. So, okay, here we go. So, Stefan question: could the Sphinx have existed as a statue or rock outcrop prior, and then simply been refaced during the Old Kingdom?
I don't know the specifics of why they chose the enclosure for the Sphinx. They must have had a reason. I'm not sure. Did it start out as like an obvious focal point? Like, this is a natural rock. They didn't build the Sphinx, right? It is just carved. So
yeah, it's carved out of a natural limestone outcropping.
Yeah, so it must have stood out to them for some reason.
The indigenous, well, a potentially indigenous oral story is that that particular place has been a bit of a mecca point for people to come to, because a bit like Glastonbury, the area has got good vibes, juju, energy, whatever. So people would come, and that's where the whole oracle sort of mythology comes in, where you go and how you approach the Sphinx is supposed to be, you're supposed to go there with questions and answers, and people have apparently been going to that place, and then I think they kind of like immortalized it with something to look at or a figure. But apparently that place, people were coming to like the rock place before there was any kind of carving.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the question is not directed towards me, but I think that getting into like the psychology of early Egyptians, they're as far as we know, they are a sun worshiping culture. I mean, they follow the sun. Almost everything is about the sun, from the beginning of Egyptian civilization all the way to the end. And they saw the sun, or the solar disk, Ra, which later becomes a solar disk, Aten, but Ra, the sun is rising in the east, and they noticed this natural limestone outcropping that is facing direct east. So there's probably some time in early pre-dynastic history where people noticed the fact that this huge, strange outcropping that sits just above the city of the city was actually called White Walls, like the pre-dynastic city that was around Memphis is called White Walls. And so you have this huge limestone outcropping sitting above it. And probably what I'm guessing it is as the sun rises in the morning, the sun rays are the first thing that hit that natural white outcropping that sits above the city, or that natural limestone outcropping. And so because the sun is hitting that first and it stands out among the landscape, it probably becomes sacred over time. So I don't really think it sounds implausible that the Sphinx outcropping was something significant before it was ever carved into being a Sphinx.
I wonder, this is just a random speculation as well, but I wonder if before it was carved at all, if when the Nile flooded, that was like a point above the water that they could be on, and became significant for that reason. I don't know. I don't know enough about it to know how high the water goes and whether it would totally bury the Sphinx, but it's interesting to imagine this outcrop existing.
Yeah, it would have come within. I mean, there is the Valley Temple. There's a dock right on the outside of it where you would pull a boat up to the temple. So I mean, you're talking about if you were standing in between the Sphinx paws, you could throw a rock into the Nile River from there.
Yeah.
So that is very interesting. Yeah,
I don't know. That's why we got to invent this time machine. You know,
Yeah,
we got to go back. Yeah.
Oh man, that's such a great point. You know, as people are sailing by, there's this huge, you know, these
maybe they're going down the river, it's flooded, but there's this big rock that isn't, and it allows them to, you know, maybe it's also reflecting off the sun too. Who knows?
Yeah.
I've just seen a good starred question, Luke, if you want to grab it.
Oh, okay, you start it. Oh, okay. Who is it from?
Marlon, just because it's on point of what we're talking about.
I'm sorry. What's the name again?
Michael Marlon.
All right, let me find it. All right, Michael Marlon. You want to read it, Johanna?
Yeah, the shaping enclosure sits along the Khafre Causeway, which is used as a natural level road to build the first two pyramids. Well, yeah, that's the big causeway that goes from the butt of the Sphinx up to like the middle pyramid. That's the Khafre Causeway, which is, if you go to the side of the causeway and drop down, that's where you've got those like dozens of doors that go and then drop like 120 feet down into the bedrock of the Giza plateau. So the causeway is both a road, which people, they're saying assumed is the way. We have no idea how they built the two pyramids, but what's really cool is that under that causeway is the entrances to the secret chambers, like the Osiris shaft and the chambers all under there, and the entire Giza plateau is like an ant's nest of underground tunnels.
Yeah.
And people have no idea because they walk up and down the causeway and then not realizing that literally under there is a 120-foot shaft drop going into like.
It's a very unceremonious entrance into the shafts below Giza. You wouldn't even. It's filled with trash, and you wouldn't even. Wouldn't even know it's there. So here's and thank you, Michael, for the super. By the way, here's an interesting one. I think. Okay, so he says, I want to ask Stefan if there are ways to find better methods to seek evidence of theories that we hold on how things were in the past that are still unknown. It's a wordy sentence, but I think that there's something interesting to pull out of that.
I think we always have to be bear in mind how the methods we use affect our knowledge of the past. And for example, I said earlier, you know, I interviewed geneticists about the earliest human DNA recovered from Europe, and it was really interesting. They were saying they had a lot more bones from the site than they could test with DNA. But the problem was, when they were excavated several decades ago now, they used resin and glue made from animals to preserve them. And that has totally contaminated any possibility of getting any DNA from them. It's gone. You're just going to get the DNA of that glue, of whatever animal made the glue. It's going to come back as like horse's hooves or something. And so, and another thing now, again, on the DNA front, we can now get DNA from sediments. We've realized that DNA can be preserved just in dirt. And so you could sample the dirt all around whatever you're excavating, and if you're very careful and diligent, you'll get DNA from it too. And if you think back in the past to how much dirt was just thrown away, like the dirt around a Neanderthal burial, just thrown away, just in the shovel, whoop, see ya. And now it would be so valuable to have that. So I don't know what methods, how we can improve our methods. I don't know that, but I know that we will, and I know that we have to keep that in mind when we're doing these things. I know some people get very frustrated that we don't just dig everything up and blah blah blah, but you always got to keep everything in mind, that we don't know everything.
Yeah, the problem with hasty archaeology is how horrifically recorded all of the data from early Egyptology is. I mean, we have mastabas that Petrie found around the turn of the century that are lost today. We don't even know where there was actually a mastaba that he found dated to based on the stone vessels and the pottery that was in it, that he dated to the first dynasty, and he measured the interior chamber, and it had the same dimensions as the king's chamber in the Great Pyramid, which is, if you think about that long enough, what is happening there? Why does this chamber have the same dimensions? It's
Well,
gone.
the golden ratio and everything that going on in the kitchen chamber.
But the I would love to be able to go see this mastaba and walk inside of it, but it's gone because Egyptology at the very beginning was tomb raiding essentially, and very
smashing the way through.
Yeah. So okay, so Stefan, I would like to know what is the favorite skull you have and why. Also, where is it from?
I'll show you right now.
He was prepared. He knew exactly.
He said, I was hoping somebody would ask this.
This is a really interesting one. So this is called Paranthropus boisei.
Ooh.
And we're very confident they walked upright. They're an upright walking hominin. They lived between 1 million years ago and probably like 3.5. And as you can see, they have this really pronounced sagittal crest on their head and a huge jaw, absolutely huge jawbone. Reserved. Like
kind of stuff of nightmares. Like if you bumped into that in the dark.
Yeah, they were really thick.
And what's as many this again?
I think the last evidence we have of Paranthropus boisei is 1 million years ago, and it'll go back to like 3.4. They're in the same lineage as Australopithecus, probably. And there's really interesting stuff about going on with these. So there's a lot of evidence that they ate tough grassy plants. They were upright walking like us, but they probably might have eaten grasses, sedges, things like that. This is why they have these enormous chewing infrastructure in their body. Wow. It's almost similar to a gorilla. But they also seem to be associated with very early older one tools. I don't have an example.
Feeling the top of your head and just feeling that like weird ridge thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we still there's still, even with Asian Homo erectus, like a pronounced ridge there.
Fin. It's like a head fin, a skull fin.
A dorsal, a dorsal fin.
Nothing on like a literal like mohawk of bone.
God, can you imagine hitting your head? You'd be like, I've twanged me head fin.
Well, would there have been any muscle there? Like, you know how on a dog skull they've got that like dorsal bone looking thing, but they had muscle that filled it all in.
Yeah, this would have all been filled in with muscle. So I don't know how.
I was just imagining hitting it all the time. Like,
I bet the bite force of that guy was ridiculous.
Yeah, probably. And I love this guy because when I did my degree in archaeology, I was for sure thinking I was going to study Egypt, I was going to study Rome, blah, blah, blah. But in the first year, you kind of have to do a little bit of everything. And this, I had a class like Introduction to Human Evolution. And when they mentioned this guy, Paranthropus boisei, I'd never seen anything like it. And it opened my mind to the wonders of the Stone Age. And it was one of those moments where I realized how little I knew and how crazy it could be. And they were from Tanzania anyway, this particular specimen. But yeah, Paranthropus boisei, they're almost like, I don't know, human cows, but yet also maybe they were making some of the earliest stone tools.
Human cows.
It's very interesting.
That's cool.
I'm gonna nickname him Boise P.
Now, do these guys? Do they have are they the ones with the Acheulean pear-shaped hand axes?
No, the Acheulean. No, that would be Homo erectus. That would be this guy.
Okay, in Homo erectus, that's not 1 million years ago.
Yeah, all these groups overlapped for hundreds of thousands of years, and that's one of the interesting things in human evolution.
So much time.
How did they interact with each other? Did they, were they competitors? Did they ignore each other? Were they, if you go back far enough, at some point they had to have been part-time lovers like us and Neanderthals.
Mm-hmm.
We're related to them in some way.
Yeah.
So it's
great granddaddy.
Great times. You could say great for the rest of the day and you won't even get there. Yeah. Great.
So we got a couple more for you. I want to be mindful of your time.
So
I saw that you and Mini Minuteman, you guys did an episode on this that I based our thumbnail for this live stream on. Actually,
I saw it.
Stefan, what do you think about the Richat structure fulfilling almost all criteria that Plato identified as Atlantis?
Well, I'm not married to what Plato said about Atlantis is the first thing to say, right? So I don't think after 9,000 years, I don't even think, like I said, I think it's an allegory. But if there is an element of truth, I don't think there's going to be much truth in it about time and location and all of this stuff. So I'm not too concerned about what Plato said about Atlantis. The point of the video, which I made with Milo Rossi, was that there is actually a lot of archaeology found from that region, and there isn't anything to really mark it as having a different history to the rest of the region. You see a lot of hand axes from Homo erectus, like really a lot of them. And you see a lot of Paleolithic stone tools from humans. There's a lot of archaeological sites from the surrounding area, a lot of really beautiful rock art, but nothing that makes you think there's anything like an urban society there. I would say.
I would say, just as like some, if you ever had the time, there's a really good fair Atlantis documentary. You can get it on Amazon Prime. It's called The Atlantis Puzzle, and it's looking into ancient Neolithic West Africa and about how a lot of that aligns to potentially being that like origin of the Atlantis myth, about the society in West Africa that did they've got cave art that depict the war that happened between West and East Africa, and that it was filtered into like Egypt and the Mediterranean. And the fact that they use this an academic who's like really good with that. He went through all like Homer's Odyssey and ancient texts. He was like commended by the Greek Academy for his like work in ancient texts, and he went through, and it was really, really, I thought it was a really fair documentary, going through everything in Plato's text and going like, not valid allegory, potentially here, yes, because we know that in the Green Sahara, and we found evidence for this West African society that had boats and that they could navigate all of the tributaries, and just looking at the geography of the Green Sahara. And I just found it really, really fair. And that really did shape a lot of where I'm heading towards my the kernels of Atlantis coming from West Africa, and really remembering the time where there was a society there that did have boats I found it really, really interesting. So I would definitely have a look at the Atlantis puzzle, because I found that it was really fair about like, what evidence do we have right now that could link to anything historical, and what do we have that's like, no, we don't have any evidence for this or that, or what's
I mean, certainly during the Green Sahara, there was for sure, I don't want to say there's nothing going on there now, because I don't want to be disrespectful to your West African viewers, but the life there would be way different to how it is now. Obviously, that it's the Sahara Desert, totally different. And
no, I met a guy. It's not unfair to say. I met a guy called Josh. Blanking on his last name. He has a YouTube channel. He went out to the Richat structure a couple of years ago, and I got to meet him in Egypt. Happened to be passing by a tour group, and he went out there, and he said he nearly died. People go, "Oh, just go to the Richat structure." Like, it's ridiculous. It's expensive. Because of the war in Mauritania, it's actually like, it's not advised to travel there at all. It's not safe for tourism. He said there's no infrastructure for food, so he nearly didn't survive, just basically because he couldn't find food. The only reason he survived was because locals took pity on him and gave him, he said he was eating leaves at one point just to fill his stomach with something. So yeah, it's very different, and obviously it's a complete desert wasteland today, but 10,000 years ago would have been the most amazing, lush, basically like the Amazon. Sort of as a comparative.
I mean, you said at the start of our conversation, Johanna, that you imagine Atlantis more in common with a Neolithic society as such. I don't have a problem with that view at all. If there's like if it's the thing that I always get hung up on is the globe spanning nature of it, and this idea that it was, you know, so much more advanced than anything else. That's what always I get hung up on.
There's nothing advanced really to it, apart from when I've seen, there's a city in Turkey that we went to, and that was from 8,000 BC ish, and it was a city with like houses and streets, and the houses were like double leveled, and they had hundreds of people living there. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know that there were like city, like it was way more advanced, like the culture that was there. And there's a brand new museum in we were like one of the first people to get to go and see it in Turkey, so it's all brand new and sparkly and empty. And the artwork, the jewelry, the food, the culture that was there, and I was really like, whoa, that's literally like only 1,000 years from what we're talking about, the origin stories of Atlantis. I really thought that there was like, before, there was this gap of like 5,000 years to fill between a place where there could be a society that people were remembering. But definitely this I didn't think to research this whole ancient West African East African war that went on, and it's depicted in cave art, and they found like hundreds and hundreds of battle spears and stuff. There was definitely this fight from sort of coming out from one area to another and overtaking another. And I was like, I can definitely see how it mirrors both there are some Greek wars that it could mirror, but it could equally mirror this ancient idea of this other like Neolithic West African society. And I was like, interesting, okay. And exactly in the dates that they were saying it would be. So
I've just thought of this thing. Sorry, there's so much to say with this whole topic.
Yeah.
But, like we could probably spend the next 3 hours continuing this whole conversation. But you asked earlier, Luke, about maybe what people don't appreciate about archaeology, or people that believe in Atlantis don't appreciate about archaeology. I think people don't appreciate how good people were in the Stone Age, even hunter-gatherers, at producing art, at adapting to their environment, producing a surplus of food, doing all sorts of things, being very creative. And so, like, to me, if even hypothetically they find something on the scale of like Göbekli Tepe in the Rishat structure, to me that wouldn't prove Atlantis, because it's still, I think it's just humans, another example of human creativity and ingenuity. Like I'm really not hung up on trying to prove the truth of Plato's story. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just one source in the whole scheme of human evolution and human history. I'm really not hung up on looking for clues of its truth at all. Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of brings us to our last question here for you. So, Stefan, might there have been Atlantis-like myths handed down since the Younger Dryas, or was it more likely an event more recent to Plato's time?
I think more likely more recent to Plato's time, but I do believe that oral history could be passed down for that length of time. I'm not opposed to the story having origins that long ago. I just think it's more likely that it was more recent, but once you go beyond the writing, it's so hard to date these things. You know,
there's a really, really good argument for ancient Egyptian. When you look into ancient Egyptian history and oral history and their origin history and their origin stories, there is a lot of crossover between the themes of the Atlantean story. The fact that they came from a primordial island that was destroyed in a deluge, and that was the original OG. And so the Egyptians say that they were they are a legacy society. Like that's their origin story. It's just on the walls. They're talking about. So yeah, like the ins and outs and the Greekification of it, I think was all Plato, but like there's a really good argument that the Egyptian origin story has a lot of like narrative similar, the idea that people came from a place that they had to leave and they had to regeneration and start again, and that the first dynasty was, which for me makes sense why the first dynasties were like out of the gate knew how to build megalithic stuff. Like out of the gate, like they had this, there was some sort of knowledge. I don't feel like they just invented it all at that moment. I can see why there would be this idea of a legacy society that came out of the Green Sahara. And I feel like if I was going to put my money anywhere, that we're going to see the same pattern that we're seeing in the Amazon rainforest, that we're LiDAR scanning and we're finding hundreds and hundreds of cities with thousands of people living in them and going, oh, we didn't account for that. I think the similar thing could be happening in the Green Sahara, in that weird gray area between Göbekli Tepe and the First Dynasty. And it would align exactly with the origin stories of Egypt, that people came from the main river that was going across the Green Sahara. And then when that all dried up around, they started to shift over by 4000 BC, and they restarted again all the way along the Nile. They shifted river to river. And we would find prototype Giza stuff in the Sahara.
One thing try not to derail the conversation, but one thing I wonder with the Green Sahara is, when that area has all that water in it, how big is the flow of the Nile, and how much does it flood? That's, you know, the Amazon basin in our time now is enormous, and that's one thing I would if I could find a geologist to chat to about that, who studies like the history of the geology of that area. It would be interesting to see how big the flow of the Nile was during that time.
Yeah. The Nile, it appears like the reason why 99% of Egypt now lives around and along the Nile. It's literally like Nile, and it's all along the Nile. It's just, that's where everybody lives today, because it's the only place for water access. And it became like that after the Sahara all came in. But before that, it makes complete sense that everybody would be living in along all the, people live near water sources, and there was an even bigger river that would have been running across the Green Sahara. And the tributaries, looks like they would have split a lot of Mauritania and Libya. There was like quite a big divide between Libya and, anyway. So I have a feeling, my spidey senses say, if humans repeat and they do the same thing in one area that they do in the other, that we're going to have a similar, when we get to the point where we LiDAR scan the Sahara, we're going to find probably things, structures and settlements and cities, and like we do in the other side.
Yeah. Well, hey, Stefan,
For
man,
sure.
I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. We did a 3-hour one. Woo!
Wow. It's honestly, it flew by. I had a lot of fun.
I know.
Yeah.
It's fun when you're talking about ancient stuff.
So,
Applause.
So,
Clap.
so as a final thing, just even aside from Atlantis, why should people be interested in Ice Age cultures? Which is, that Ice Age cultures are much vastly pre Ice Age cultures, which connects with your channel. That's something huge that you focus on. Why should people be interested in that, and where can people find you?
You can find me at youtube.com/Stefan Milo. Why should people be interested in this stuff? I think it's really interesting to understand our origins on a deep level, before everything that we know and love today basically existed, before your country existed, before your tribe existed. Way deep human origins gives you, I think, a well-rounded appreciation of who we are and where we come from, and how similar we are too. We're really all so closely related. We perhaps don't need to squabble so much. I'm not saying picking up a book about Ice Age history is going to cause world peace to break out, but we really are so similar and so interesting. And our ancestors were up to all sorts of very creative and inventive things in very hard circumstances. And it's just interesting, man. You got to do something before you kick the bucket. You might as well look into deep human origins and keep your mind working and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not to be that's kind of a bummer to end on, perhaps. But
I would just like to point out some fun irony, because your second name, I know you say Milo, but I read it as Milo, and Milo happens to be the main character in the Disney movie of Atlantis. So I think that's just beautiful.
Yeah. There we go.
Wrong name.
Yeah. My
Luke,
cousin.
We just have a few more. We're going to make sure that we just whiz through and acknowledge all of our lovely.
Yeah, well, I was thinking we let Stefan go.
Stefan go.
Yeah,
Yes.
if you got fire off questions, 10 more minutes. I got 10 more minutes. It's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
There's just a few more that we're going to acknowledge, because we really, really appreciate when people tip us, because this is fantastic.
Of course, yeah.
Make sure.
I do have an 8th birthday party to go to, viewers.
Oh, yes, you do.
Let's go through them. Let's rattle through them.
Okay, I'm just making sure we've got some soups in here that aren't directly addressing you. I just want to make sure that if there aren't any. Do you see any, Johanna, in the soups that are directly to Stefan? I'm gonna look in the live comments. You guys make sure when you leave something, because I mean I'm scrolling through thousands of comments right now. So please say his name.
I'm going to the start.
Yeah. I'm looking through live comments too.
So one of the questions was, will AI, this is from HR, will AI open a new era with language deciphering?
Language deciphering. I don't know. Interesting. You guys have probably heard about the tablets from Herculaneum being
the scroll.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Told in Stone, Stefan? Have you seen his channel?
Yeah, I know who they are.
Yeah. So, his name's Garrett. He and I are buddies, and he's big into this. This is really amazing. Anyways, keep going. I'm sorry.
No, but it's really interesting. You see it with these Herculaneum scrolls, and you see it as well with the Nazca lines in Peru, that AI has the ability to pick out details that are totally invisible to the human eye. And so who knows what will be discovered? Language deciphering, I'm not sure. But in terms of finding things that were invisible to us, 100% it's going to help. 100%.
Yeah, it's going to speed up pattern recognition for sure.
Yeah.
Buddy, lovely to see three of you chatting. Have a delightful silly season. Well, thank you very much, Seven Ren.
Thank you.
Stefan, thank you so much for coming on. And even though I think like Johanna and I certainly agree that I think Plato's Atlantis, while it's allegorical and he's using it as a tool to speak to the Athenian people, I think that he's drawing on real cities that were destroyed by cataclysmic events. How far back that goes, I don't know.
Anyone's interpretation.
But while we probably view that like somewhat differently, this is an example of how people can sit down and have a conversation for 3 hours, and really all three of us we probably have a lot more in common than we disagree with on Plato's Atlantis. Like Johanna and I are just as smitten and fascinated with your hominid skulls that you have on your rack and everything else that you're interested in. I just thank you for coming on and having a real adult conversation about these topics.
I had a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun being here for sure. I could literally talk about this stuff all day, to be honest. We didn't even get through all our questions, and we've been chatting for 3 hours.
Back on at some point next year, we can just pick up a chat. But
I knew it wasn't going to be possible to get through everything.
Okay, last few minutes. Someone says, Johanna, can you please say the word precision? So, am I saying it wrong or precision?
It's probably going to get cut into a sound effect now. I should start developing sound effects for this show.
More air horns. Woo, 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 woo.
Single gave $19.99 and he says, "Happy holiday, buds." Thanks, Chuck. I've been to Turkey with Chuck, and I've been to Easter Island with Chuck. He's my pal from New York. And Jeremiah. Oh no, I'll just do this one first because it links back what we were saying about your view of Atlantis, Stefan. HR says Minoans had a matriarchal dyeing and saffron industry, and the first thalassocracy, which the Phoenicians inherited. Sounds Atlantean plus terror.
I don't know what that word means. Do you guys know what that means? Thalassocracy?
Thalassocracy. I don't
No,
know.
I have no idea. Let's look it up.
But
Thalassocracy. Thalassocracy is a state that has a primary maritime realm of seaborne empire. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that makes sense. That's definitely sorry.
That Scrabble list.
Yeah. Add that to the Scrabble list. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's all of the stars. I'm just making sure. I'm sorry if we've missed anyone. Oh, one more. It says Lincolnstein wants to know if anyone has excavated or investigated the Gympie Pyramid in Australia. Thanks for the stream. I wasn't aware of any pyramids in Australia.
I've never heard of it before.
No. I'll put it on my Google list. Thank you, Jeremiah. But I think that's all the stars, and we've literally hit the 3-hour mark. So let's wrap up. Let Stefan go to his birthday party.
Yeah. Hey, man. Thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you, Stefan.
It's been a real pleasure having you on, and we're definitely going to invite you back on next year to. I want to learn more about the skulls on your rack and ancient hominids and there's so many questions that I was thinking of that I need to ask at another point. So we'll do one that's specifically focused on. I know you don't like to say it because you're a humble guy, but your expertise. I'd love to spend a couple hours focused on that.
Well, it would be my pleasure.
Yeah. Yay! Oh, thank you. And have a really good Christmas. Merry Christmas, happy holidays.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you both.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thank you so much. Yeah, Merry Christmas to you as well. And Stefan, you have very, very Merry Christmas and enjoy the time with your family.
Thank you. I will. You do both. Thank you so much for having me. That was a lot of fun.
All right. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool. Okay. So are we, I'm just going to kind of go through some of the stars too.
I think we did all the stars. Yeah. I think that was I
put it up there. I'm just going to see. I would put it up there. Yes. Here I am. And so is Ozzy. Yes. There was interviewing Neanderthals, ex erectus. I don't know what this means.
I can't remember what that meant, but thank you. Yes, there was interviewing Neanderthals. Oh, you mean like Neanderthals and Erectus were having a conversation? Maybe.
Could be. But thank you very much, Hyper Baroque. I was wondering before this conversation if any of you watch boxing. Thanks for bringing it up. Great fight last night. It's if I'm going to watch boxing, I need to get a subscription to something instead of buying the cards all the time. If there's like the Paul Tyson fight, I was so disappointed in. I don't know. Boxing seems to be fighting.
I prefer to do boxing. I used to go to a boxing club, so I prefer, it's more fun, I think, to do it. I'm the same with sports. I prefer to do the sport than watch the sport. But my boyfriend likes to watch boxing, so he did watch the fight. Cool. That's how I know when there's boxing on, because he's watching it.
Yes, and thank you very much, Ikramudin Zwain. Let's see, Jose, what's up, man? Merry Christmas to my favorite archaeologist. Thank you very much. Hope to see you again sometime. Also, thank you for the camera that you gave me. I got some footage of the top of an Olmec head, which was very interesting. Oh, wow. And I needed that, and I just didn't know that I would. I'll flesh into that at some other point. Squirrels to question marks to monkeys to humans. It's the missing link. Oh, I should start this. Oh yeah, I bet if we talked about the missing link, that would have set Stefan off. Do you know
what? That's going to be that. When we invite him back, we'll say we're going to talk about skulls and missing link.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think actually the better. Now that we've wrapped the conversation, I think the better title for this conversation and episode should probably be like Lost Ice Age Civilizations, or like Lost. That it was a bit more. We went kind of more into Ice Age.
It's impossible to name these things before we do it.
Yeah, because we're doing it live and it's a free flow conversation. But yeah, we can go back.
Okay, so Hyper Baroque again, man. Thank you so much. It could be ice ages, warm periods, even cemetery impacts, or cemetery. I'm not sure what word you're trying to use there, but something has has repeatedly set back the course of human intervention. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so obvious that there are. I mean, I could list them off. One of the things I didn't even list off was that from the coast of Florida down through the Caribbean and to South America, there are these shell mound cultures that exist between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago, and it goes on for 2,000 years, and then about 5,000 years ago, or maybe it's 5,000 BC, they just stop. They get disconnected from Florida down to South America. My guess is that probably back-to-back cataclysmic hurricanes just levels that whole shell mounding civilization. So, I don't know. I totally agree that there are just chapters.
I'm definitely I'm in team cycles of time periods of, and it's all completely tied to what's going on, how the earth is doing. Is it cold period, hot period, like the deluges? Things can get wiped away in an instant. Like so I think that we I don't think we will ever be able to account for all of the time periods and disasters and what we're missing. So okay, I said
thank you very much. So I think we've come.
We're done. Yeah, cool.
To an end.
Well, this has been an epic. Normally we try and keep the pod at about an hour and a half, but because we were having 3 voices today, we were aiming for like 3 hours and we hit it. I think I need to see if my legs work now.
All right. Well, hey,
good up for
Johanna. What's I don't know if you can talk about it. I was gonna ask you what you got coming up before the next.
I can say that. So, I will not be able to join you in Egypt in January because that's where you're going. But because I've landed an acting job, and when I'm not doing fun researching ancient history stuff on the internet, I'm a working actor, and I've landed a job in January. So I'm going to be off in January to film that. It's going to be on English and American TV. It's not that big, so it's not exciting, but I just don't know what I can talk about yet. But I have to. I thought I was going to relax over Christmas. I have to learn all my script and my lines, literally, because I start filming first week of Jan. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
Yeah,
well, you're going to be.
Yeah, well, congratulations to you, by the way. Hold on. I got to use my new sound effect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Practice my speech.
Everybody send applause emojis in the comments. That's amazing. I'm very happy for you. So we will be resuming Raiders in February once she wraps up her acting job, and then I get back from Egypt. I don't get back from Egypt until the end of January. So Raiders episode 12 will be there. And you guys who are tuning in, you should go back to the beginning and watch our new intro that we just premiered today. Yeah. So also in the month of January, Raiders will finally be available in audio format on Spotify and all of your other podcast apps. So
now we've got the music locked down. We can edit them to go out in audio because we've just been doing it live with all of you guys every single time. So that's cool.
So, well, Johanna, thank you so much for your time. It's great to see and talk to you again. Great to see you.
Good Christmas.
Yep, great to see and talk to all of you Raiders as well. And I hope that the Raiders have a very Merry Christmas. Also, our New Year's resolution needs to be to come up with an outro. But for now, fortune and glory, everyone. Fortune and